Chapter 269. March was rainy. In Zhonghai, a first-tier bustling city, one naturally could not feel the leisure of a small city in the south. The drizzling March seemed to have covered Zhonghai with a thin layer of gauze. The couple sat quietly in the stands of the sports field. In front of them was the football field brimming with youthful sweat, but behind them was the old building of the Republic of China. With such a profound background, it seemed to have covered their backs with a hint of loneliness and otherworldly charm. The hazy artistic conception of the misty Jiangnan could probably only be experienced in this beautiful campus. The little fellow could not feel the tranquil and distant artistic conception. Instead, she was completely attracted by the lively football game on the field. Although she did not even understand the rules of the football game, as long as the audience began to cheer, she would immediately jump up and cheer with everyone. At this time, someone shouted, "Enchanting is here." This sentence was like a stone thrown into the lake, immediately splashing circles of ripples. After hearing this sentence, many of the audience immediately stood up and ran out of the sports field. The players on the field also heard the movement. This was not an official game, but a training game for the school's football team. Therefore, several of the team members stopped on the spot. After looking around, they did not even bother with the game and directly ran out of the sports field with the crowd. Seeing that the lively sports field suddenly became empty, the little fellow ran to Chen Shi and asked doubtfully, "Papa, why did they leave?" Looking at the little fellow's unsatisfied look, Chen Shi immediately smiled and pulled her into his arms. Then, he fooled her. "They are students, of course, they are going to class. Nian, do you still remember what Teacher Wang taught you before? What should you do after hearing the bell?" She had been to kindergarten before and naturally knew the rules of the kindergarten, so she immediately laughed and replied, "I remember. I want to go to the classroom." Smart. You see, your brothers and sisters have all gone to class. Do you want to go to class? Hearing this, the little fellow immediately tilted her head and pondered. After all, there were so many children in the kindergarten. In addition to teaching them singing and drawing, the teachers would also organize them to play games together. In fact, it was quite fun. But if she went to kindergarten, she wouldn't be able to stay by her parents' side all day. Therefore, after serious consideration, the little thing shook its head and said with obvious hesitation, "I don't want to go." When Chen Shi saw her reaction, he immediately knew what was going on. Looking at this situation, if he were to guide her a little after returning to Shangjing, this child would probably still be willing to go to kindergarten. Because many students had left, the field had become much quieter. Without any excitement to watch, this little thing obviously couldn't sit still. Therefore, Chen Shi picked up the little fellow and held Qin Ruoying's hand as they wandered around the school again. There were 3 campuses in Zhonghai University. They were currently at the headquarters, which was the old campus. However, even though the old campus was located in the city, it covered a large area. It was more than 3,000 mu, which was more than 2 million square meters. Therefore, it would take at least 1 or 2 hours for the couple to explore the entire Zhonghai University. Anyway, it was still early, and they had nothing to do, so they casually strolled around the campus. They didn't take the main road, but chose a small path in the forest. The rain was so light that they didn't even need to use an umbrella, but it was long-lasting. A few drops would fall from time to time, so it still wet the stone path along the way. Walking on such a path, in a trance, the deep and distant mood came back. He still remembered that 10 years ago, they also walked side by side on this path. Even if there were no words along the way, it didn't prevent them from knocking on each other's hearts. Just like the moral scriptures said, the big voice is silent, the elephant is invisible. And, great love is speechless. The family of 3 strolled slowly along the path. After passing through the forest path and walking around the lake, they arrived at the teaching building area. The school was supposed to be a quiet place, but now it was very lively. They didn't know what happened, but many students crowded in the open space outside the teaching building, blocking the surrounding roads. This lively scene naturally attracted the little fellow's attention. "Papa, what are they looking at? I want to see it too." Under the little fellow's constant shouting, Shi had to lift her up high, and then tried to squeeze in the direction of the crowd. Although most of the vision was blocked by the wall of people, Shi listened for a while and understood what was going on here. It turned out that there was a film crew here. These days, filming was not a rare thing. The main reason why there was such a big commotion was mainly because of the female lead of this film. The female lead was called Enchanting, and she was a popular female star recently. Her popularity was already very high, and she graduated from Zhonghai University, so it was a home field for her. Naturally, the junior brothers and sisters came to support her, which was why there was such a big commotion. Papa! They're shooting a movie. Shooting a movie. The little fellow also heard the discussion around her. When the 3 words, shooting a movie, drilled into her ears, the little fellow suddenly sat on Shi's shoulder as if she had been injected with stimulants. I want to see a movie. Papa, go over a little. I can't see. I can't see. Although there were many people around, the discussion was not very loud. After all, everyone knew that the sound of the scene was recorded in a movie, so when they spoke, they deliberately lowered their voices. After the little guy made such a ruckus at the top of his voice, it immediately attracted the attention of many people. The students standing in front turned around to look at the little fellow, and then they all moved to the sides, making a path for them in the impenetrable crowd. Respecting the old and loving the young was a traditional Chinese virtue, which was most easily reflected in the hot-blooded college students. Thank you. Shi squeezed through the passageway with the little girl in her arms and thanked the students along the way. At this time, Qin Ruoying whispered a few words to the little fellow. It was not right to shout like this in public. It was very rude, and it showed that she had no family education. The little fellow was very sensible. So after listening to her mother's words, she seemed to understand that her behavior just now was a little rude, so she copied Shi and kept thanking the students on both sides. Thank you, brother. Thank you, sister. I'm sorry. After saying that, the little fellow was a little embarrassed and stuck out her little tongue. That cute little look made a female student next to her couldn't help but praise, Sister, your daughter is so cute. Thank you. Qin Ruoying smiled and nodded. After reaching out and pinching the little fellow's little face, she followed Shi to the front of the crowd. When they came to the front row, they finally saw the appearance of the big star. She was really beautiful. Probably because they were shooting a youth campus drama, the female lead was dressed as a student and looked very pure. With the help of the makeup artist, she looked about the same age as the surrounding students. She was completely a young girl in her early 20s. However, when Shi saw the appearance of the female star, he immediately couldn't help shaking his head and laughing. Chapter 270. Ni had changed her name to Ni. Last year, due to the broadcast of a phenomenal web drama, she became popular all over the internet. Coupled with the company's support and various resources, she was successfully sent to several of the most popular variety shows. She established a youthful and lovely persona in front of the audience and attracted a large number of fans. Because of this, Ni became one of the most popular young actresses and successfully entered the ranks of A-list actresses. Times were developing faster and faster, and so was the entertainment industry. Just like what Andy Zai sang in 17, I shamelessly participated in the challenge when I was 17. Even stars have training classes. It's so refreshing. In just 1 year, Andy Zai joined the wireless training class in 1981 and started as a film and television actor. Under the guidance of brother Fa, he started as an extra and entered the music industry in 1986. It wasn't until the early 1990s that he finally gained a place in the music industry with the song, If You Were My Legend. After that, in addition to creating a series of iconic characters on the screen, he also released a number of hit singles such as Thank You for Your Love, Wang Qing Shui, and other classic love songs. Finally, he was promoted to the throne of the 4 heavenly kings by the Hong Kong media. At this time, Andy Zai had been in the music industry for more than a decade. Almost all of the stars in that era were versatile artists who could act and sing. Many of them were even radio hosts. But now? From the 18th tier to the A-list, it might only take one movie or TV series. some of them didn't even know how to act. They only needed to be good-looking and participate in a few variety shows to become popular all over the country. This also created a strange phenomenon. Nowadays, stars become popular quickly, but they also become popular very quickly. A few years ago, the little fresh meat that was in the headlines almost every day was forgotten in just 2 or 3 years. Enchanting knew the cruelty of the entertainment industry. Since she finally became popular, she naturally wanted to seize this opportunity. Therefore, she tried her best to maintain her popularity. Therefore, she suggested to the director that the shooting location be her alma mater. She also wanted to use this opportunity to make another wave of headlines. No matter what, Zhonghai University was still one of the top 10 universities in the country. Enchanting's academic qualifications allowed her to beat the other illiterates in the entertainment industry, earning her the title of Goddess of Academic Qualifications. The reason why she was able to call out Enchanting's real name was because this little girl who appeared to be in her early 20s was actually an old auntie from the same batch as them. For an idol artist who relied on her looks and personality to attract fans, age was obviously a scary thing. After all, Qin Ruoying, who was the same age as her, was already a mother of a 5-year-old child. On the other hand, Enchanting still had to play the role of a pure and lovely girl in front of the public. This kind of situation where his appearance did not match his actual age was really suspicious. Would she show symptoms of schizophrenia? Because of the little girl's protective talisman, the students forcibly made room for the family of 3 in the front row. After hearing Chen Shi's words, Qin Ruoying immediately looked in the direction that Chen Shi was pointing at. It's really her, Enchanting. She's a big star now? Enchanting and Qin Ruoying were students of the same major, so they usually saw each other frequently. Although their relationship was not considered close, after so many years after graduation, suddenly meeting an old classmate of hers naturally gave people a sense of closeness. Enchanting had only entered the entertainment industry after graduating from university. She could be considered to be one of those talented people. After acting in a web drama, her acting skills had improved rapidly. Now that she was acting in a movie, no one could find any fault with her. This scene was very simple. It was a scene where the male and female lead reunited in university. After all, it was just a youth school movie, so the requirements for acting skills were not high. As long as the performance was natural, it was fine. Therefore, after 2 takes, the director shouted through the loudspeaker, "Cut! Very good, this scene is done. Young Master Ting, change your clothes and prepare for the next scene. Qian, you've finished filming today. Go back and have a good rest. We'll continue tomorrow." "Okay, director." After hearing the director's words, Enchanting smiled politely. Seeing that the crew was busy rearranging the set, someone hiding in the crowd suddenly shouted, "Enchanting, I love you." This sentence instantly ignited the enthusiasm of the surrounding students. Everyone chimed in one after another. "Senior, you're so beautiful. I love you. Senior, give me an autograph. Senior Qian. I want to give birth to your children." Looking at the lively scene, if it were not for the staff stopping them, this group of enthusiastic students would have rushed up to Enchanting to ask for an autograph. "Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my cute junior brothers and sisters." Seeing that everyone was so enthusiastic, Enchanting turned around and bowed to the surrounding crowd. When she bowed for the 3rd time, Enchanting finally found a familiar figure in the crowd. Then, Enchanting was stunned. With Chen Shi's eyesight, he immediately noticed the strange look that flashed across Enchanting's eyes. However, he thought that Enchanting was just surprised to see an old classmate, so he did not take it to heart. Enchanting was indeed an actress. After the surprise flashed across her face, she immediately put on a warm smile and walked toward the direction of the family of 3. The surrounding students thought that she was coming over to give an autograph, so they instantly became excited. "Senior, I have a pen. Give me an autograph. Please give me an autograph. Senior, I love you." Enchanting kept waving at the surrounding students, but she did not have any intention of giving them an autograph. After arriving in front of Qin Ruoying, Enchanting lifted the cordon set by the crew and smiled at Qin Ruoying. Long time no see. Qin Ruoying did not expect Enchanting to recognize her as an old classmate, so she was stunned for a moment before she replied with a smile, long time no see. As the crowd was too excited, after a simple greeting, Enchanting gestured for Qinshi's family to follow her in. Seeing this, the couple could not help but look at each other. Enchanting then led them through the cordon and followed her to the temporary resting area set up by the crew. There were originally a few crew members resting in the resting area, but when they saw Enchanting coming over, they very consciously retreated. After inviting Qinshi's family to take a seat, Enchanting then looked at the little girl in Qinshi's arms and asked, "Is this your daughter? How old is she?" "Almost 5 years old." Qin Ruoying replied politely, then turned to the little girl and said, "Nian Nian, greet auntie." Hearing this, the little girl immediately greeted Enchanting sweetly, "Auntie." "Good girl." After a few simple pleasantries, the two of them fell silent. They did not seem to know what to talk about with each other. After all, the two of them were not very close when they were in university. They could not even be considered friends. They were probably classmates who would greet each other when they met on the road. The reason why Qin Ruoying felt that Enchanting was very close to her was because they had been classmates for a long time. Qinshi and Qin Ruoying were originally not in the same major, so naturally, he and Enchanting were even more distant. Therefore, Qinshi simply sat beside the little girl and played with her, leaving the space for them to catch up. Enchanting was silent for a while. Then, as if she thought of something, she suddenly smiled and said, "Ying. Do you mind if I call you that?" "I don't mind. Do you know? When I first saw you, a very popular online song suddenly popped up in my head." What song?" "School Bell." Then, Enchanting softly hummed the song. "They all say she is a flower, flowers are not as good as her. They all say she is a dream, how many people have pursued her. The heartless years like water, slowly painted in the books. Ask the fleeting clouds, how is our school bell? Who plays the guitar and wants to be the school bell, who will be the school bell? So love is like a blackboard eraser." Chapter 271. Enchanting simply hummed a few words. Her voice was very pleasant and it seemed like she had learned to sing before. Therefore, such a seemingly vulgar online song had a different flavor under her interpretation. Looking at Qin Ruoying's puzzled expression, Enchanting suddenly smiled and said, "Ying, 10 years have passed and you're even prettier than before. You're indeed worthy of being the campus belle of our batch." Qin Ruoying smiled and shook her head when she heard that. She turned to look at the little girl in Qinshi's arms and replied, "I can't afford to be called that. You, on the other hand, are now a big star and the juniors outside are all your fans." Haha. Enchanting looked at the crowd outside the resting area and a faint smile flashed across her face. Ever since she became popular, the feeling of being the center of attention had always lingered around her. From the initial discomfort to the current calmness, Enchanting had a very rich psychological experience. She was now like a goddess standing on the clouds. This gave Enchanting a lot of confidence. For example, when she faced the goddess in front of her who once made her feel ashamed, Enchanting could not help but feel pity for her. With Qin Ruoying's beauty, Enchanting would not be surprised if she became the second sister Milk Tea. However, she still married the poor guy that everyone looked down on and even gave birth to a daughter for him. Although their family seemed to be very happy now, such an ordinary life was definitely not what Enchanting wanted. What a pity. Enchanting felt pity for Qin Ruoying because she had been in the entertainment industry for many years and had a pair of discerning eyes. Just like Tang Wei's character in When Beijing Meets Seattle 2, Enchanting could easily determine the total value of Qin Ruoying's clothes with just a casual glance. Qin Ruoying didn't wear any jewelry or watches. Although the simple gray coat looked like it was custom-made, it still couldn't hide the rough workmanship of the coat itself. A conservative estimate was that she was only worth 500 yuan from head to toe. Looking at Chen Shi and the little girl, they were also dressed in cheap clothes. If a man was really capable, he would obviously not mistreat his wife and daughter. Therefore, Enchanting came to a conclusion. The family of 3 in front of her was not very rich and might even be a little short of money. As the saying went, a woman should be raised well. Although Qin Ruoying still looked glamorous now, what would happen in a few years? Women needed maintenance and maintenance needed money. Perhaps she would only truly understand these principles when she grew old and exhausted the beauty bestowed upon her by the heavens. In order to avoid looking down on others, Enchanting also asked about Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying's current work situation during the chat. When she found out that the husband and wife were running a tea house together, her guess was immediately confirmed. This caused Enchanting to feel bored to death. After all, they were not from the same world. No matter how outstanding they were when they were students, once they chose the wrong path after graduation, wouldn't the end result be to become ordinary? Enchanting was a popular actress. Even if she found out about Qin Ruoying's background during the conversation, her face did not show a trace of contempt. After the two chatted for a while, Enchanting apologetically mentioned that she had to rush to a job later. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying immediately nodded to express her understanding. Then, the reunion ended in a happy atmosphere. Before leaving, Enchanting took the initiative to add Qin Ruoying's WeChat and warmly said that they could keep in touch in the future. The reason why she did this was because she felt that Qin Ruoying still had room to recover. People would always grow up. Under her influence, perhaps Qin Ruoying would suddenly come around one day. With Qin Ruoying's beauty, figure, and unique temperament, as long as she nodded, Enchanting could definitely introduce her to an ideal family. Maybe, they could even be good sisters in the future. Enchanting smiled as she sent Chen Shi's family out of the cordon. After waving goodbye to them, she turned around and walked to the set. From the beginning to the end, she did not put on any airs in front of the family of 3. The couple walked out of the crowd under the envious eyes of the fans. After walking for a while, Qin Ruoying suddenly asked thoughtfully, "Shi, what do you think of Enchanting?" Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled and replied, "He's an adult." "What do you mean? Isn't there a popular saying now? Peppa Pig gets a tattoo and applause for society. Enchanting is a standard society person." "I don't quite understand what you mean." When Chen Shi saw Qin Ruoying's confused face, he could not help but reach out and hug her slender waist. He smiled and said, "If you don't understand, then don't think too much. Let's go, we don't belong to the same world." The couple continued to stroll around the campus. It wasn't until the little girl was a little bored and wanted to go home to watch cartoons that they walked back in the direction of the school gate. Just as they were about to walk out of the school gate, a Toyota Alpha, commonly known as a celebrity nanny van, drove past them discreetly. When the assistant sitting in the passenger seat saw Chen Shi's family, she could not help but turn around and remind Enchanting, "Chantian, your old classmates are still there. Should we give them a ride?" Enchanting was sitting in the back with a face mask on. When she heard the assistant's words, she turned her head sideways and glanced out the window. Then, she said indifferently, "No need, let's just go." "Okay." She had already cast the bait. As for whether the fish would take the bait or not, it was up to the fish. Enchanting was half lying on the seat confidently. She even began to look forward to the moment when Qin Ruoying would chat with her on WeChat. However, when Enchanting was resting with her face mask on, the assistant's voice sounded again. "Sister Chantian, look, that person seems to be CEO Su from Weisheng Pharmaceutical. Hey, the one next to him should be CEO Ning from China Ocean Corporation, right? Why are they here?" As a celebrity assistant, there were actually a lot of things to learn. For example, she had to at least know some business moguls. What were business moguls to celebrities? They were scripts. They were resources. They were everything. To sum it up in 2 simple and crude words, that was, sugar daddy. As long as the sugar daddy was strong enough, even an internet celebrity could be smashed by a rich businessman. Therefore, How to curry favor with the rich had become a compulsory course for celebrities. Of course, this did not mean that she had to sleep with them. Businessmen were after profits. A movie was worth hundreds of millions of investment. Did she really think that she could become the female lead just by sleeping with the financier? How could it be that simple? Businessmen would definitely not do a losing business. It was not easy to get a rich businessman to invest in her new movie. It was obviously a very effective way to make her presence known in front of a rich businessman. Therefore, Enchanting immediately sat up from the chair. After making sure that she was not mistaken, she pulled off the mask on her face and quickly shouted to her assistant, "Where's my bag? Quick, quick, let me touch up my makeup." The minivan was parked in a parking space not far from the school gate. Then, Enchanting started to touch up her makeup in the car. But just as she was in a hurry, something happened that left her flabbergasted. The two top business moguls in Zhonghai were like concierge at this moment. They quickly ran to Qin Shi's family, bowed and asked for instructions, and escorted Qin Shi's family to the Bentley Grand Limousine. At this moment, Enchanting was completely stunned. An indescribable feeling suddenly surged from her heart, and immediately, her face became rosy like a ripe rose. And this feeling of blushing, she had not experienced this for many years. The assistant saw that Enchanting was still in a daze, so she could not help but remind her, "Sister Qianqian, they seem to be leaving." Hearing this, Enchanting suddenly trembled as if she had been electrocuted. Chapter 272. Qin Shi and his family did not know what kind of psychological changes Enchanting had gone through in the past 2 hours. At the same time, what Enchanting did not know was that when Qin Shi pointed out that she and Qin Ruoying were not from the same world, Qin Ruoying nodded thoughtfully. Then, she took out her phone and deleted Enchanting's WeChat friend list. Therefore, Enchanting might not be able to wait for Qin Ruoying to take the initiative to send her a WeChat message. The reason was simple. Although they were old classmates, after so many years of polishing, their worldview, outlook on life, and values were clearly not on the same line. In other words, they did not have the same values, so of course, they would not be able to pee into the same pot. Qin Ruoying had a cold personality. In her opinion, since she and Enchanting did not have the same topics, there was no need for them to contact each other. Because of this, her total number of WeChat friends was the same as Qin Shi's. She only had 3 contacts, Qin Shi, Aunt Zhang, and Qin Wanqing. In fact, if it were not for the frequent video calls with Aunt Zhang, Qin Ruoying would not have downloaded WeChat. The family of 3 got into Su Wei's luxury car. Then, they slowly left Zhonghai University under the envious gazes of the students. After the car drove for a while, Ning Zhongguo looked down at the time. 4:50 p.m., it was almost time to prepare dinner. Therefore, he rolled down the partition in the car and asked the little girl with a pleasant expression, "Nian Nian, are you hungry? What do you want to eat later? There's all kinds of good food in Zhonghai. Uncle will take you to eat the best food today, okay?" Perhaps it was because they had just discussed the strategy, but Ning Zhongguo now focused all his attention on the little girl. He finally understood what was going on. In this family of 3, Qin Shi did not have the final say, and Qin Ruoying did not have the final say. The one who had the final say was the little girl in front of him who was tossing and turning in her seat. After hearing Ning Zhongguo's words, the little thing pouted and began to think. She wasn't hungry yet, but she still wanted to eat something. Therefore, after touching her little belly, the little girl said proudly, "My papa's cooking is the best. I like to eat papa's food. Today, I'll treat your family to a meal outside. How about we go to a restaurant? Eat outside? What are we eating? I see that you like it. Nian Nian, what is your favorite dish?" When it came to eating, the little thing immediately became excited. Therefore, she immediately replied excitedly, "I like braised lion's head. And sweet and sour pork ribs. And prawns. Papa's prawns are delicious. Then Uncle will take you to eat the most authentic local dishes in Zhonghai, okay? All right. Although this little thing didn't even know what the local dishes were, she still nodded quickly like a chicken pecking rice. Seeing that the little girl agreed, Ning Zhonghua looked at the couple behind him and said with a smile, "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, I wonder if this local dish is to your liking?" Hearing this, Chen Shi was not polite at all. After nodding with a smile, he replied, "We are not picky about food. You can arrange it as you see fit." He was not a reclusive master. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei had flattered him like this. If he did not give them face, it would indeed be a bit too unreasonable. "That's great. I happen to know a local chef. His braised lion's head in brown sauce was the champion of a cooking competition. I think this child will definitely like it." Then, the luxury motorcade headed by Bentley and Mercedes-Benz S-Class drove to Dianjiang Avenue. After arriving at the destination, Chen Shi found that Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei had already arranged everything. Tonight's dinner was not at a restaurant, but on a yacht. "Papa, look! So many boats." After the little girl came to the dock, she pointed at the yachts outside the dock and shouted excitedly. Although she had been on a luxury cruise ship, she still couldn't figure out the difference between a big ship and a small ship, so she could only use a small ship to call a yacht. What was a yacht? Its positioning was not a means of transportation, but a high-end durable consumer product for water supply and entertainment. What did Ning Zhonghua do? He was the former chairman of the Ocean Voyage Group and the largest shareholder of the Ocean Voyage Group. The cruise ship that Fong Lei used when she got married was rented from the Ocean Voyage Group. Therefore, the large luxury business boat docked at the dock was obviously the place Ning Zhonghua had arranged for this dinner. It could be seen that in order to flatter this person, he and Su Wei had racked their brains. The reason why they chose to eat on the yacht was actually very particular. Once the yacht left the dock, it would become an absolutely enclosed space. In this environment, it was naturally easier to close the distance between people. Don't you see how many secret transactions that can't see the light of day were negotiated on the yacht? For Ning Zhonghua's painstaking arrangement, the couple didn't have much reaction, but the little girl was excited. After all, compared to the cruise ship, the boat in front of her made her feel the charm of the sea more. So, after boarding the boat, she jumped up and down excitedly in the boat. The yacht itself was synonymous with high quality, and the decoration in the cabin was naturally extremely exquisite and luxurious. The couple went straight to the top of the yacht under the leadership of Su Wei and Ning Zhonghua. When Chen Shi stood on the open-air observatory on the top floor, he couldn't help but nod with satisfaction, expressing his satisfaction with Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei's careful arrangement. At this moment, the sun hadn't set yet, and the sunlight after the rain was particularly clear, sprinkling on the sea as if it was going to dye the blue sea golden. Looking around, the high-rise buildings on both sides rose and fell one after another along the Dian River, looking particularly magnificent. Coupled with the sea breeze that constantly blew against his face, the scene at this moment was truly intoxicating. Even in the 21st century, it could still make people feel emotional. It could be said that the distant mountains were like black, and the nearby water was like smoke. Of course, this mountain was not a real mountain. It was a majestic skyscraper. The yacht set off from the ferry and sailed along the Dian River all the way to the East China Sea. Because there was still some time before dinner, the little girl ran to the deck and couldn't help but shout, "Papa! I like it here. I like it here." Looking at her happy and excited appearance, Chen Shi couldn't help but smile. Chapter 273. As the saying goes, one who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei spent so much effort to come up with so many tricks. Obviously, they didn't just want to make their presence known in front of Chen Shi. And this kind of flattery, for these two business moguls who were over 100 years old, was really a different experience. After all, with their status, even the mayor of Zhonghai had to give them some face. When money and power were no longer life goals, then health and longevity were obviously their last pursuit. Therefore, Chen Shi didn't even need to think to know what the two of them wanted from her. Seeing that the little guy was so happy today, Chen Shi gave them a chance to speak. The moment Chen Shi's voice fell, even with Ning Zhonghua's shrewdness, he still couldn't help but have a flash of joy on his face. Even Ning Zhonghua lost his composure, not to mention Su Wei. Overjoyed, Su Wei's face immediately showed a harmless smile. That smile also made him look like a farmer on the ridge of the fields. Where was his usual decisiveness and decisiveness of a CEO? The two quietly looked at each other. Then, Ning Zhonghua coughed twice and put on a slightly awkward expression as he said to Qin Shi, "Mr. Qin, actually, it's like this. You know, life is not like before. Alcohol, women, avarice, and anger are the most hurtful. When a person's body is weak, it is easy to get all kinds of diseases. Only when you get sick will you realize the importance of health." Sure enough, it was for the energy pill. Qin Shi leaned on the railing and looked at Ning Zhonghua quietly. Under his gaze, Ning Zhonghua seemed to be under a huge pressure. In just a short while, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was like a primary school student who made a mistake. His voice became smaller and smaller. In the end, Ning Zhonghua couldn't help but lower his head. He didn't dare to look at Qin Shi again. "Ever since the incident last time, the two of us have been following your orders and not revealing any information about you. We told the public that the expert who made the Yama's sorrow had passed away. But what we didn't expect was that the rumor would become more and more ridiculous as it spread. Now, as long as someone has a difficult illness, they will come to us for help. We don't know how many people we have offended because of this." While Ning Zhonghua was explaining his difficulties in a low voice, the little fellow on the second deck suddenly raised her small head and shouted at Qin Shi, who was standing on the third deck, "Papa! There is a sofa here. Come and sit down." As she spoke, she excitedly patted the deck sofa beside her. The sofa was soft, even more comfortable than lying on a bed. Coupled with the afterglow of the setting sun and the gentle caress of the sea breeze, this young fellow had learned to enjoy the beauty of nature. "Okay, Dad will come down to accompany you." Qin Shi turned around and replied to the little fellow. Seeing this, Ning Zhonghua immediately swallowed back his unfinished words, and then stood aside solemnly without saying a word. Qin Shi glanced at him, but didn't say a word. She walked straight to the spiral staircase on the side. Seeing this, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei couldn't help but have a very complicated expression on their faces. "It's over," both of them knew their limits. Seeing that Qin Shi didn't say anything, they naturally wouldn't ask for trouble on this topic. Then, dinner began in a happy atmosphere. The yacht meandered along the Dian River. The little fellow chewed on the ribs and looked at the beautiful scenery brought by the lights on both sides of the river. She couldn't help but murmur, "Papa, it's so beautiful outside. Do you like it?" "I like it." "Then Uncle will treat you to a big meal and take you to see such beautiful scenery. Shouldn't you thank Uncle properly?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately wiped the oil stains on her mouth with her hand, and then smiled sweetly at Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. "Thank you, Uncle Ning." "Thank you, Uncle Su." "Hee, Nian Nian, if you like, you can come and play with Uncle at any time. Uncle will take you to have a good time in Zhonghai, how about it?" "Okay. Thank you, Uncle. This child is really likable. Mr. Chen is so lucky." After dinner, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei sent Qin Shi's family back to the Kangju community. As for the elixir, the two of them didn't dare to mention it again. After the little fellow politely said goodbye to the two uncles, the family of three turned around and walked to the Kangju community. When they brought the little girl to the entrance of the neighborhood, the couple stopped in their tracks at the same time. At this moment, the two of them couldn't help but have mixed feelings in their hearts. After all, this was the home that the two of them built together. Although this home was simple, it carried too many things: the sky, the breeze, the air, the temperature, the fragrance, at that time, that feeling, the memories that were stagnant like film, you and me at that time. When the breeze blew, those things that couldn't be taken away, were all called the past. Under the dim yellow light, the couple's shadows were very long. Perhaps because of the emotions in her heart, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but have tears in her eyes. And just as the couple looked at each other in silence and reminisced about the past, a clear and crisp voice sounded very untimely. "Mama, let's go home. We're going home." As she spoke, the little fellow who spoiled the mood sat in Chen Shi's arms and reached out to Qin Ruoying. She wanted to go into her mother's arms. After all, for this little fellow, her mother seemed to have left for a longer time. Qin Ruoying quietly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and then smiled as she took the little fellow from Chen Shi's arms. Accompanied by Nianyan's somewhat disturbing shouts, they finally returned home. Perhaps it was the same feeling as Chen Shi felt when he first returned. When Qin Ruoying walked into the room and saw the familiar furnishings in the house, she couldn't help but burst into tears like a broken dam. 5 years. It was indeed too long. After entering the room, the little fellow ran straight to the TV. After skillfully turning on the TV, she looked back at the door. When she saw her father and mother hugging each other excitedly, she immediately tilted her head and asked in confusion, "Papa, what's wrong with Mama?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying gently pushed Chen Shi away and wiped the tears on her face. Seeing that she was still adjusting her mood, Chen Shi turned back and said to the little fellow, "Sand got into Mama's eyes. Papa is blowing it for her, oh." The little fellow nodded as if she understood, and then shouted to Qin Ruoying, "Mama, watch cartoons with me." As she spoke, she patted the sofa beside her and motioned Qin Ruoying to come and sit down. "Okay, we'll watch with you." Qin Ruoying wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and then pulled Chen Shi to the little fellow's side. The family of 3 huddled together on the old sofa. Chapter 274. The next morning. After eating the breakfast made with love by Chen Shi, the little fellow lay on the sofa with a bulging belly and obediently recited a Tang poem. "Sleeping in spring, I hear birds singing everywhere. Wind and rain come at night, I wonder how many flowers fall." The little fellow recited very fluently, so after she finished reciting, she raised her little head and waited for her mother's praise with joy. However, what she didn't expect was that when Qin Ruoying came to her side, she didn't praise her, but patted her lightly. This made the little fellow pout unhappily. Looking at her aggrieved little face, Qin Ruoying smiled and pinched her little face, then patiently explained, "Nianyan, when you recite, you have to sit properly. Do you remember what mother taught you? You have to sit properly, and you have to stand properly. Have you forgotten it so quickly?" Hearing this, the little fellow's head immediately drooped down. After shaking her head, she seemed to realize that she was wrong, so she burrowed into Qin Ruoying's arms and said very coquettishly, "I didn't forget." "It's good that you didn't forget. Sit up, mother will recite the ancient poem with you, okay?" "Okay." After all, the child was still young, so she had to develop good living habits. Therefore, after teaching her to recite Quiet Night Thoughts and Climbing Yellow Crane Tower, Qin Ruoying allowed the little fellow to watch cartoons. While the little fellow was watching cartoons, the husband and wife softly talked about the recent schedule. Gu Lao had already brought the twins back to Shangjing. Previously, he called Chen Shi to ask when they would open the door. Although the house in the Kangju district was simple, it was built by the 2 of them, so Qin Ruoying wanted to stay here for a few more days, which could also be considered as a kind of remembrance. But just as Qin Ruoying was recalling the little sweetness in the past, she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, "Oh right, do you have Lin Xian's contact information?" "Yes, I'll find it for you." Chen Shi took out his phone. After dialing Lin Xian's number, he handed the phone to Qin Ruoying. The call was quickly connected. Lin Xian's voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "Hello? Chen Shi?" Her voice was very calm, as if there was no emotion at all. When Qin Ruoying heard her voice, she did not speak immediately. Instead, she playfully pressed the speaker button and signaled for Chen Shi to answer. Chen Shi glanced at Qin Ruoying, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Then, he said to the phone, "Ahem. Yes, it's me, Ying is beside you, right? Get her to answer the phone." "Huh?" The couple looked at each other in surprise. Qin Ruoying asked in confusion, Xian, how did you know I was there?" Hearing this, Lin Xian on the other end of the phone immediately laughed out loud. Her laughter was very clear, like the tinkling of a bell. After laughing for a while, she suddenly pretended to be angry and said, "Humph. You didn't tell me you were back for so long. Ying, I'm telling you, you'll lose me if you do this. Didn't I call you as soon as I got back to Zhonghai? Don't give me that." "I'm not listening." "Aya, Xian, this is my fault. I apologize, don't be angry, okay?" Humph. Although they had not contacted each other for many years, their relationship seemed to be better than before. Lin Xian was different from Ni Qianqian. She was one of Qin Ruoying's few friends. Therefore, when Lin Xian pretended to be angry, Qin Ruoying actually acted coquettishly on the phone. After a while, Lin Xian was giggling. Okay, I forgive you. When Qin came back to find you, I helped a lot. You have to treat me to a good meal. Okay, when are you free?" "I'm free anytime." "How about today?" "Both of you should be fine, right?" "Okay, what do you want to eat?" The two of them discussed for a while on the phone. After confirming the time and place, they were ready to end the call. But just as Lin Xian was about to hang up, Qin Ruoying suddenly asked, "Oh, right, Xian, how did you know I'm back?" Since Qin brought her home, the couple had been staying in Shangjing and did not contact anyone. So not only Qin Ruoying, but even Qin was a little curious. How did Lin Xian know that Qin Ruoying was back? After hearing Qin Ruoying's question, Lin Xian did not immediately answer. Instead, she asked, "Guess?" Xian, stop keeping me in suspense." After the two of them joked around for a while, Lin Xian finally revealed the reason under Qin Ruoying's relentless questioning. "Hey, don't you know that you're already an internet celebrity?" "Internet celebrity? What's going on?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying and Qin could not help but look at each other. They did not understand what she was up to. Ha 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 ha. Although they hadn't met, Lin Xian could still imagine their dumbfounded expressions, so she couldn't help but laugh exaggeratedly on the other end of the phone. Xian, we're both confused by you. Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Let me ask you a question first. Did the two of you take photos at an internet celebrity children's playground in Shangjing? Internet celebrity children's playground? Qin Ruoying still did not understand the situation, but Qin suddenly came back to his senses. Previously, they took the little girl and the twin brothers on a trip to Inkits with Elani friends. They wanted the little girl to experience a high-end children's playground. At that time, when they were sitting next to Nian and playing with her, there was a girl from the photography department at Peking University who wanted to take photos of them. In the end, she even said that she wanted to use their photos for a competition. The photo of the two of you was used to participate in the International Photography Awards. And it even won first place in the professional portrait category. It seems to be on tour around the world now. Pfft. After hearing what Lin Xian said, Qin almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Wasn't this too ridiculous? At that time, he did not want to dampen the girl's passion for photography, and Qin Ruoying did not mind, so he nodded and agreed. However, what Qin did not expect was that this girl was so amazing. She actually used this photo to win a world-class award? It was no wonder that Lin Xian said that the two of them were now internet celebrities. Was this not considered internet celebrities? They were already King famous overseas. This sudden situation made the couple not know whether to laugh or cry. Lin Xian probably guessed how the two of them were feeling, so after laughing for a while, she quickly hung up the phone. After hearing the beeping sound from the phone, Qin Ruoying handed the phone to Qin and asked Qin to look for information about the photo online. At the same time, Lin Xian sat in front of her desk and looked at the photo on the table with a blank expression. On her face, there was no trace of the happiness she had shown on the phone just now. There were two photo frames on the table. One was a full-body photo of her. The other, wasn't it the photo of Qin and Qin Ruoying? I also want to let the pirated students see this, so I can only put it in the main text. I hope you can forgive me. What I want to say is, the theme of this book is about stay-at-home dads, but it is also because of stay-at-home dads that my writing style is limited. Because of the existence of Nian Nian, every day that passes in the book, Nian Nian will grow up another day. Therefore, this book can't be like the common urban novels. In the blink of an eye, a month has passed. In the blink of an eye, a year has passed. Immortal cultivation and stay-at-home dads, in essence, are conflicting. Therefore, the plot of this book is usually not continuous. After all, there is always a cause, a process, and a result when something happens. And this process needs time to ferment. For example, this photo may be buried for half a year before it appears again. I hope everyone can understand what I mean, sincerely. Also, I update slowly, but I will never stop. This is for you to hear, and also for me to hear. It is also a kind of self-warning. Regarding the issue of updating, I also want to try my best to return to a stable 2 updates a day, but I should have entered a bottleneck. I am very tired of writing and also very annoyed. I feel that every word I write is torture. I didn't ask for monthly votes on the day I put it up, because I expected this to happen, so I didn't dare to make careless promises. In short, I have already decided. I will start from 3 updates a day and slowly adjust back. Finally, thank you again for your continuous support. Chapter 275. World Photography Competition Exhibition. This award was very prestigious and professional, but it was too professional. Therefore, when the winners of the competition were announced, it didn't cause much of a stir on the internet. After all, compared to breaking news like a celebrity's infidelity, professional news was indeed too niche. Lin Xian said that Chen Shi and his wife were now online because of this photo titled Lovers, which really amazed many photography enthusiasts and insiders. Photography was the same as painting. It was to show static beauty to the world. But the difference between photography and painting was that painting could be created at will, while photography honestly recorded everything that happened at the time. The scenes shown in the photos were also scenes that had once appeared in this world. The selection method of the photography award was nothing more than the evaluation of the theme, scene, composition, exposure, tone, clarity, and several other aspects. The reason why this photo won first place in the professional portrait category was entirely because the couple in the photo was too dazzling. Just like a war photographer taking photos of refugees on the battlefield, the subject matter itself was a bonus. It was a kind of luck to be able to meet such an outstanding model in the vast sea of people. But the art of photography sometimes really did require a certain amount of luck. Weren't many world-famous classic photos captured by photographers by chance? Therefore, although the photographer named Sun Yuanyuan's skills were mediocre, she still managed to stand out from the rest of the entries and become a celebrity in the circle. And now, wasn't this award-winning photo on display at London's Somerset Palace? After Chen Shi showed the news he found on the internet to Qin Ruoying, the couple didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that they had to pay more attention to protecting their portrait rights in the future. They didn't want to be online. So this kind of feeling of putting their photos on the internet for the world to see, it was a bit strange. However, since they had already given it, it was too late for regrets. Therefore, the couple could only adjust their mood and completely forget about this matter. Later, the couple accompanied the little girl to watch cartoons for a while, and then went out to find Lin Xian to catch up. The lunch location was chosen by Lin Xian. It was a Western restaurant with a good reputation and was very friendly. The restaurant's location was good. It was on the edge of the Dianjiang River. Sitting in the outdoor seats outside the restaurant, one could overlook the entire Dianjiang River. Perhaps it was because it was close to the business district, so when Chen Shi's family arrived at the restaurant, there were already many business people in formal attire sitting there. Everyone was sitting by the river, admiring the beautiful scenery while discussing work. It could be considered a small bourgeois atmosphere. Ying, here, as soon as Chen Shi's family arrived at the restaurant, Lin Xian stood on the steps and waved at them excitedly. It had to be said that Lin Xian's outfit today was very eye-catching. As a professional woman who has lived in the CBD business circle for a long time, Lin Xian wore a dark blue dress and a well-cut long trench coat today. In addition, she had combed her short blonde hair into a bob with bangs, which not only reflected the capable temperament of an urban white-collar woman, but also had a unique charm of a mature woman. It was simply a beautiful scenery on the banks of the Dianjiang River. After Qin Ruoying heard Lin Xian's shout, she immediately waved at her. At this time, the little girl lying in Chen Shi's arms finally saw Lin Xian, so she immediately waved her little hand and shouted at Lin Xian happily, "Sister! Sister!" As she shouted, she also motioned for Chen Shi to put her down. After Chen Shi put her down, the little girl took a step and ran toward Lin Xian. Lin Xian squatted on the ground and gently hugged the little girl in her arms. Then she pinched her little face and asked, "Nian Nian, how have you been recently? Did you miss sister?" "Sister, I miss you so much." The little girl's mouth was so sweet that it immediately made Lin Xian giggle. After all, this little thing had said before that she liked Lin Xian, so when she saw Lin Xian again, she was naturally very close to her. Seeing their daughter acting coquettishly in someone else's arms, the couple didn't mean to be jealous at all. Instead, they couldn't help but smile. When the two of them came closer, Lin Xian let go of the little girl, then got up and hugged Qin Ruoying intimately. After the hug, she said very exaggeratedly, "Ying, long time no see, I missed you so much. Io, how did you become so beautiful again?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile and ask, "You have such a sweet mouth, who did you learn it from?" Qin Ruoying hadn't seen Lin Xian for a long time. She originally thought that after so many years, she and Lin Xian's relationship would be much more distant. But she didn't expect that after meeting again, Lin Xian still gave her a very close feeling. Perhaps, this was the so-called best friend? The two of them greeted each other. Then, Lin Xian pulled Qin Ruoying directly to a chair at the side, and then began to ask her where she had been all these years. This question really troubled Lin Xian for a long time, so much so that she even had some thoughts that she shouldn't have. But fortunately, these were all just thoughts that had just sprouted. But these thoughts were all strangled in the cradle by her in a timely manner, therefore, when Lin Xian saw Qin Ruoying again, she couldn't wait to know the cause and effect. And regarding this problem, the couple had already discussed the countermeasures, so Qin Ruoying immediately made up a lie that was born out of the truth. The general meaning was, her family didn't agree to her marriage with Chen Shi, so she could only abandon her husband and daughter and return to her hometown. These years, she didn't have a very good life. It wasn't until Chen Shi came to her hometown to find her that her family was moved by Chen Shi's sincerity and finally approved this marriage. The story wasn't very complicated, but Lin Xian couldn't help but frown slightly after hearing it. "Ying, what era is this? Your family still pays attention to the words of the parents and the matchmaker? Why do I feel that with your personality, you shouldn't be so obedient to your family? Are you lying to me?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile and ask, "Oh? Then tell me, why would I lie to you? I can't say it, but I keep feeling a little weird. I don't really believe what you said just now, what I said is the truth. If you don't believe me, then I can't help it, okay?" Seeing that Lin Xian nodded suspiciously, Qin Ruoying decisively changed the topic and took the initiative to ask, Xian, what about you? How have you been these few years? Are you married? Do you have children?" Hearing this, Lin Xian's expression couldn't help but stiffen, but quickly returned to normal. After forcing a smile, she replied in a seemingly relaxed tone, "Not yet, but I can tell you a piece of good news." "What good news?" Chapter 276. Engagement? After Lin Xian's voice fell, even Chen Shi, who was next to her, could not help but turn his head to look at her. It had only been about half a year since the last time they parted at the dock. Who would have thought that Lin Xian was going to get engaged? "Who is it? Do I know him?" Qin Ruoying threw out a series of questions, but Lin Xian smiled and shook her head after listening. She responded, "You don't know him." At this time, Chen Shi could not help but interrupt and ask, "Is it Li Xiuwen?" No matter what, Li Xiuwen had pursued Lin Xian for a long time. In addition, Wang Lu had been playing matchmaker and constantly put in good words for him in front of Lin Xian. So, if this lucky guy was Li Xiuwen, Chen Shi would not be surprised at all. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was, when he mentioned Li Xiuwen's name, Lin Xian still shook her head and replied calmly, "You don't know him either." "Oh, okay. Chen Shi nodded, then sat on the side and didn't say anything. In fact, after hearing the news that Lin Xian was going to get engaged, Chen Shi was also happy for Lin Xian from the bottom of his heart. After all, Lin Xian was not young anymore. It was hard enough for her to work alone in Zhonghai for so many years. If she could find someone to rely on, it would be a good thing for her. As for Lin Xian's little thoughts, it was obviously impossible for Chen Shi not to know. It was just that this kind of thing felt a little awkward just thinking about it, so he could only pretend to be confused. Qin Ruoying did not know the little secret in Lin Xian's heart, so she continued to ask curiously, "You're going to get engaged? How long have you been together?" "It's been almost 4 months. What? Only 4 months?" Qin Ruoying was truly shocked by Lin Xian's words. Based on her understanding of Lin Xian should be very cautious when it came to relationships, so she really couldn't imagine how outstanding that man was to be able to get Lin Xian to the point where they were talking about marriage in just a few months. Xian, marriage is not child's play. You've only known each other for a few months, and you're already engaged. What's the difference between this and a flash marriage? Wasn't the most common ending of a flash marriage a flash divorce? Especially for women, if they were so careless about marriage, they would be completely irresponsible for their own future. Qin Ruoying wanted to persuade Lin Xian to reconsider. However, Lin Xian seemed to have thought of everything. She smiled and gestured for her not to worry. Then, she said, "Ying, don't worry. I'm not a little girl anymore. Do you think I'll be blinded by love? When I said that I was about to get engaged, there was actually a prerequisite." "What prerequisite?" "He has to pass my strict test." Lin Xian couldn't help but blink playfully. Seeing that Qin Ruoying was still confused, she smiled and explained, "We're classmates. Your daughter is already so old, but I'm still single. How can I not be anxious? How can my family not be anxious? Even if you're anxious, you can't be so careless." Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at Lin Xian in exasperation. Seeing this, Lin Xian held onto her hand and patiently explained, "Ying, listen to me. Actually, what I mean is that I'm not young anymore. Since I agreed to date someone, it's obvious that I'm aiming for marriage. Grandpa Mao once said that those who don't date for the purpose of marriage are all hooligans. So, I have to carefully examine him. If he can successfully pass my examination, then why can't I marry him?" Qin Ruoying was speechless. After hesitating for a long time, she asked with a puzzled expression, Xian, do you love him?" "Love?" Hearing this, Lin Xian couldn't help but chuckle. "Ying, you might not know. How difficult is it to meet someone you like in this world who also likes you? Actually, a lot of people can only choose one of two. You can either choose the one you like or the one who likes you. I think I'm still very rational, so I choose the latter." Saying this, Lin Xian couldn't help but glance at Chen Shi. She seemed to be envious of the relationship between the couple. Seeing that Lin Xian had already said this, Qin Ruoying naturally couldn't say anything else. Therefore, after hesitating for a while, she could only sincerely wish her well. "Okay, although it's still a little rushed, I believe in your taste, so I wish you happiness in advance. All the best, Xian." "Thank you." Perhaps because this topic was a little heavy, the two quickly changed the topic, and then chatted about everything. Qin Ruoying hadn't talked so much in a long time. After all, she didn't have many friends, and Lin Xian was one of the few that she had left. Therefore, after lunch, Chen Shi's family didn't rush to leave. Instead, they continued to accompany Lin Xian for afternoon tea. In the end, because Lin Xian received a call from her leader, saying that there was an urgent matter that required her to return to the company, Lin Xian could only reluctantly say goodbye to Chen Shi's family. "Sister, goodbye." Lin Xian had just treated the little guy to a lot of desserts, which made the little guy very happy. Therefore, even though Chen Shi had already walked a distance away with her in his arms, the little guy still reluctantly turned back and waved at Lin Xian. "Nian, goodbye, sister will treat you to good food next time come, mua." "Goodbye, sister." Hearing this, the little guy covered her mouth with both hands, gave Lin Xian a flying kiss, and then obediently returned to Qinshi's arms. Lin Xian stood by the street, until Qinshi's family got into the car and left. She didn't leave. Just like that afternoon last year. It was a beautiful September day, and the pier was quiet. She stood under the palm tree, just like today, watching the car gradually disappear into the distance. Lin Xian was slightly absent-minded. But at this moment, a feminine man's voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Xian, I've been waiting by the side for so long, but you didn't even give me a chance to go on stage. Let me tell you. I'm angry. Lin Xian turned back to look, only to see a gay-looking man in tight pants, walking quickly towards her with a resentful expression. Seeing this, Lin Xian complained helplessly, "Didn't I tell you to wear a suit? Look at you, how can I introduce you to my friend? Xian, I've said it many times. I don't like, wear, or pretend. What's wrong with me wearing this? Why can't you introduce me to your friend?" Hearing this, Lin Xian could only sigh, and turned to apologize to him. "All right, it's my fault, I shouldn't have asked you to come. I apologize to you, don't be angry, okay?" "Humph. I'm not happy. I'm a little angry." All right, I'll treat you to coffee, don't be angry." Saying this, Lin Xian went up to the man's arm, and pulled him to a nearby coffee shop. As they walked, Lin Xian tilted her head to look at the sea not far away. The afternoon sun shone on the surface of the sea, as if the sea was coated with a layer of gold powder. The sparkling waves were almost blinding. In a daze, Lin Xian's thoughts drifted further and further away. Actually, she didn't know what she was thinking about. She asked herself, she wasn't a chaste woman, but why couldn't her heart hold anyone else? Why? What was the reason? Lin Xian really wanted to know the answer. But Chapter 277. After a short reunion with Lin Xian, Qin Ruoying's mood became very happy. Although they hadn't seen each other for many years, after this afternoon's conversation, she was finally sure that there wasn't much of a gap between her and Lin Xian. They were still friends who could talk to each other. This was undoubtedly good news for Qin Ruoying. After all, human beings were social animals. Even if Qin Ruoying's temperament was outstanding, she still needed a few close friends to accompany her. The family of three was in a good mood. Therefore, since getting on the car, the little fellow had been sitting on her knees by the window in the back row, stretching out her head to look at the scenery outside the window. When she saw a gift shop on the street, she couldn't take her eyes off it. Because, in the gift shop's cabinet facing the street, there was actually a huge teddy bear. The little fellow liked teddy bears very much, but she had never had a teddy bear of her own, so she immediately put her little hand on the window, pointed at the teddy bear in the distance and said, "Papa, I want that." The little fellow pulled Qinshi's arm, indicating that Qinshi should look in the direction she pointed. How sharp were Qinshi's eyes! With just a casual glance from the corner of his eyes, he already understood what the little fellow wanted. But, when Qinshi saw what the little fellow wanted, he didn't promise to buy it for her. Instead, he pretended to be puzzled, as if he didn't see what the little fellow was pointing at. After the little girl anxiously shouted a few words, Qinshi put on an act and moved her head closer to the little girl. Then, she looked in the direction the little girl was pointing at. "Nian, what do you want? Why didn't Papa see it? That. Over there. Papa, look. Bear. Big bear. I want that. Big bear." In a moment of excitement, the little fellow couldn't even speak clearly. "Where? Come, let me see again." Qinshi continued to pretend that he did not see anything. There was only one reason why he was acting like a fool, and that was, he didn't want to buy the teddy bear for the little girl at all. Of course, the reason why Qinshi didn't want to buy a teddy bear for the little guy was obviously not because of money, but because he was now thinking from the perspective of a parent. After all, the child was still young and had no sense of propriety. If he blindly obeyed the child, he would unknowingly hurt the child. Of course, this kind of damage was hidden. The so-called obedience was actually a disguised form of doting. This was also a taboo question for Chen Shi. That was why he pretended to be crazy in order to fool them. The roads in the city were very crowded, so the taxi moved very slowly. However, no matter how slow the car was, when the green light came on, the taxi would still slowly move forward with the traffic. Therefore, after Chen Shi pretended to dawdle for a while, the gift shop completely disappeared from the little fellow's sight. Looking at the teddy bear that she was so fond of disappearing, the little fellow immediately leaned on the back of the chair and pouted. No matter how Chen Shi talked to her, she just turned her head and didn't say a word. Well, she was angry again. The couple looked at each other, and both of them couldn't help shaking their heads and laughing. The child's temper was getting worse and worse recently. If it went on like this, maybe she would be spoiled by them in the future. Although they didn't speak, they reached a consensus through their eyes. It was time to strangle this evil trend. The taxi continued to drive. After the little fellow's performance, the sunny sky just now unknowingly darkened at the moment. A large dark cloud appeared out of nowhere and hung over the city. It was as if it had suddenly dragged everyone from the sunny afternoon to the dark night. The street lights on both sides of the street continued to light up, and the cars on the road also turned on their headlights. The taxi driver stuck his head out of the window and looked up at the dark sky. He couldn't help but mutter in Zhonghai dialect, "It's going to rain," but what the driver didn't expect was that as soon as he finished speaking, bean-sized raindrops fell from the sky like a torrential downpour, hitting the whole car with a pitter-patter sound. A torrential rain began without any warning. This rain was very heavy. It was probably the heaviest rain that Chen Shi had seen since he returned to Earth. Because the rain was too heavy, even if the driver adjusted the windshield wipers to the highest gear, he still couldn't see the front clearly. The taxi struggled to move forward in the pouring rain. According to common sense, a heavy rainstorm like this was usually a sudden shower, and it should soon clear up. But today's rain was beyond everyone's expectations. After going through untold hardships, the taxi finally brought Chen Shi and his family back to the Kangju district. The rain didn't lessen at all, but became heavier and heavier. The rain poured down, and the wind howled. Because he didn't want to be too conspicuous, Chen Shi took off his coat and held Qin Ruoying by the corner, temporarily using the coat as an umbrella. Then, the couple rushed into the rain with the little fellow in their arms. Although Chen Shi's coat was shielding her, the splashing rain continued to hit the little fellow's face. The rain soaked down her neck and soaked into her clothes, but the little thing didn't feel cold at all. Instead, she shouted happily. "Mama, come on. Papa, come on. Run faster. Run faster. We're almost home." The loud sound of the rain completely covered her excited screams. By the time the couple finally ran into the building with the little guy in their arms, the family of 3 had all become drowned rats. Perhaps it was because they hadn't been as embarrassed as today for a long time. So when the couple looked down at the little fellow who was still giggling in Chen Shi's arms, the two of them couldn't help but giggle with the little thing. For a moment, the laughter of the family of 3 successfully covered the sound of the rain outside. But when the family was laughing foolishly, there was a sudden flash of light outside. Then, a series of muffled thunder exploded in the sky. Rumble. The wind and rain blew, and thunder and lightning intertwined. This year's spring thunder seemed to come earlier than in previous years. The deafening thunder continued to sound, and every sound could make the little fellow in Chen Shi's arms tremble with fear. Seeing this, Chen Shi hurriedly hugged the little thing tightly in his arms, and at the same time used his vital essence to block most of the sound for her. And just when Chen Shi was busy comforting the little fellow, Qin Ruoying seemed to have noticed something all of a sudden. She couldn't help but frown slightly. Then, with a puzzled expression, she came to the iron gate of the building and looked up at the gloomy sky. Chapter 278. Spring thunder sounded, and everything grew. The so-called hibernation awakening referred to one of the 24 solar terms of the lunar calendar. This solar term represented that after the beginning of spring, the temperature gradually warmed up, and the spring thunder began to shake. All kinds of hibernating animals hibernating in the soil woke up, and nature was revitalized. It was precisely because of this that this day was called Hibernation Awakening by the ancients. Today happened to be the Hibernation Awakening Day. The thunder rumbled in the sky, and bean-sized raindrops continued to drip from the eaves, like beads with broken strings, and immediately splashed everywhere when they hit the ground. The rain and mist continued, so that the whole world became a foggy scene. After Qin Ruoying stood by the iron gate for a while, Chen Shi came to her with the little girl in his arms. "What's wrong?" "There's an indescribable feeling, it feels weird," Qin Ruoying answered Chen Shi's question while stretching her hand out of the eaves. Looking at the raindrops constantly hitting her hand, Qin Ruoying's doubts in her eyes became stronger. "Oh." Although Qin Ruoying couldn't describe her feelings, Chen Shi seemed to be able to understand her after thinking about it, so he immediately asked, "Do you feel that this rain is like a gauze, covering your body with a light and comfortable flutter? You feel it too?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but feel happy. She thought it was her own psychological effect, but she didn't expect Chen Shi to feel it too. That feeling, in fact, it was like sleeping with the air conditioner on in summer. It was just that this silk was very large, thin and smooth, giving people a very comfortable feeling. Perhaps because she felt so comfortable, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but want to go into the rain, ready to experience that feeling again. However, just as Qin Ruoying was about to walk out of the eaves, Chen Shi suddenly stopped her. "Ying, go home first, you have to give Nian a bath and change clothes." "All right." After hearing Chen Shi's words, Qin Ruoying suddenly came back to her senses. This storm, it was as if there was a strange magic that made her subconsciously want to stand in the rain. After looking at the storm outside thoughtfully, Qin Ruoying reluctantly followed Chen Shi upstairs and went home. After reaching home, she began to busy herself with bathing the little guy. At this time, Chen Shi took the time to go to the shopping mall not far from the community. While buying groceries, he also bought a set of clothes for the little girl. This little thing was especially naughty when it was bathing. It splashed water and made a fuss. It simply treated bathing as a parent-child game, so it would dawdle for a long time every time. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying finally helped her to take a bath and change into cartoon pajamas for her, Chen Shi was almost done with dinner. Today's dinner was very simple. Kung Pao chicken, green pepper fried meat, tomato scrambled eggs, plus a winter melon soup. It was the most common family dish. Although the ingredients used for this home-cooked meal were simple and easy to handle, under Chen Shi's exquisite control, it could be said to be full of color, aroma, and taste. Although the little guy also had many small problems common to children, at the same time, she also had an advantage, which was that she never dawdled when it came to eating. When it came to eating, she would run faster than anyone else. Therefore, just as Qin Ruoying turned off the hairdryer, the little guy with a head of disheveled hair rushed to the side of the coffee table, picked up the spoon, and scooped up the soup. After all, her father's cooking was the best in the world. After dinner, after watching a few episodes of cartoons, it was 8:30 in the evening. Maybe it was because she was too noisy when she was bathing just now, so the little guy's eyelids were already twitching when she was only halfway through the cartoon. When Chen Shi saw the little guy's sleepy look, he directly carried her to the bedroom. After a few words of coaxing, the little thing fell into a deep sleep. In order to prevent the little guy from being awakened by the thunder, Chen Shi specially set up a soundproof restriction in the room. When he finished everything, closed the bedroom door and came to the living room, Qin Ruoying was already standing on the balcony and continued to reach out to catch the rain outside. After noticing Chen Shi's arrival, Qin Ruoying didn't even turn her head and asked directly, "Why does this rain make me feel so refreshed and refreshed?" Hearing this, Chen Shi didn't immediately answer. Instead, he gently held her lower abdomen with his left hand, then stretched out his right hand and held her hand from below. This shape was very similar to the classic bow pass in the Titanic. Chen Shi sniffed the faint fragrance from Qin Ruoying's hair. When he was about to answer her question, a sudden clap of thunder exploded in the sky again. Rumble. The thunder was very close. It was like a grenade exploding next to them. It was deafening. Therefore, after the thunder sounded, there was a burst of screams in the community. Many people were afraid of thunder. But fortunately, a thunderstorm of this magnitude might not be seen even once a year. Under normal circumstances, thunderstorms usually didn't last too long. At most, it would completely stop after a few hours. They didn't know what was going on today. This thunderstorm lasted for more than 3 hours, but there was still no sign of it weakening. If this continued, many people would lose sleep tonight. Shi gently hugged Qin Ruoying. When the rolling thunder finally stopped, he whispered in Qin Ruoying's ear, "The tide is rising." To be honest, Shi didn't think that there would be a spirit energy tide in a super first-tier international city like Zhonghai. What was even more surprising was, the scale of this spirit energy tide was far greater than the scale caused by the Qinling spirit binding array. The spirit energy contained in it was even denser than the spirit fog in the Siachen Glacier. Therefore, every drop of rain that fell from the sky contained a lot of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. How was this a simple thunderstorm? This was spiritual liquid from the sky. After briefly explaining to Qin Ruoying what a spirit energy tide was, Shi took her back to the living room and then set up a spirit gathering array for her to cultivate. After all, cultivation was a matter of accumulation over a long period of time. Even if this sudden tide of spirit energy couldn't cause Qin Ruoying's realm to advance by leaps and bounds, it could still save her a lot of effort. After all, it was a good thing with no harm. Naturally, she had to cherish this opportunity. The reason why Qin Ruoying wanted to go into the rain just now was that she had succeeded in her cultivation, so she instinctively wanted to go to places with rich spirit energy. She sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruoying until she entered the deepest level of meditation. Then, he got up and went to the balcony. The wind and rain were still outside. She stood on the balcony motionlessly, as if he was waiting for something. Sure enough. About an hour later, a deafening clap of thunder rang out from the horizon again. But this time, the instant the thunder rang out, the entire earth seemed to tremble along with it. Chapter 279. Thunder rumbled, and the earth quaked and the mountains shook. Just as the thunder roared, the entire ground shook violently. In just an instant, the pots, bowls, ladles, basins, chandeliers, photo frames, and other small objects in the room began to shake violently. They either fell on the table or fell to the ground, making a series of clanking sounds. An earthquake. Because of the frequent earthquakes in recent years, the people of Huaxia had a much deeper understanding of earthquakes than before. Therefore, the moment the earthquake happened, the entire community seemed to have been awakened from their sleep by the thunder. Countless people screamed "earthquake" as they rushed out of their houses in a panic. There was the sound of dense footsteps in the corridor. Some residents who were taking a shower did not even have time to put on their clothes at this moment. They ran out of their houses wrapped in a bath towel. It was still raining heavily outside, but at this time, no one cared so much. The fleeing crowd surged like a flood and rushed madly toward the gate of the community. In less than 2 minutes, the streets outside the community were already densely packed with people, blocking the entire road. According to historical records, there had never been a destructive earthquake of magnitude 4 or above in the history of Zhonghai. This was because Zhonghai was located in the most stable plate position in the entire Huaxia. It was not in the earthquake zone at all, so let alone a destructive earthquake, even a weak earthquake of magnitude 2 or 3 would be difficult to occur. But today, the people of Zhonghai experienced what it felt like to be in the middle of an earthquake. In fact, when the Wenchuan earthquake happened that year, Zhonghai, which was thousands of miles away, also felt it and even caused a big commotion. However, that big earthquake happened more than 2,000 kilometers away in the Chuanyu area after all, so it was far from being as real and exciting as today. Based on the strong tremor just now, this earthquake was at least a magnitude 4. 5 or above, reaching at least the level of a medium-strong earthquake. The earthquake didn't last long. It lasted for about 20 seconds. However, it was this short 20 seconds that really made many people feel like they had escaped death. People who had not experienced an earthquake might not be able to imagine what kind of oppressive feeling an earthquake would bring to people. Perhaps it was only when humans faced the wrath of nature that they would realize how insignificant they were. The downpour continued, but none of the people on the streets dared to return to the residential area. Everyone stood pitifully in the rain, looking at each other. That helpless look was as miserable as it could be, but at this moment, another thunderclap exploded in the sky. Rumble. Rumble. The people on the street didn't even have time to cover their ears before the strong tremors appeared again. In such a situation, not to mention the children, even some of the more timid females were completely scared out of their wits at this moment. After their legs trembled, they sat down on the ground and held their heads in their hands as they cried out loud. For a moment, the entire street seemed to have turned into a refugee camp. Even the torrential rain could not suppress the continuous cries from the crowd. While fear, helplessness, cold, and other negative emotions filled the entire street, there was a little fellow who was still sleeping soundly on the bed. Perhaps it was because sleeping in the rain was very comfortable, so this little thing rolled a few times in her sleep in a daze. She wrapped herself in the blanket like a cicada cocoon before continuing to sleep. Qin Ruoying opened her eyes the moment the earthquake happened. She was originally a little worried about whether the earthquake would endanger Nyanyan's safety, but after seeing Chen Shi smile and shake his head at her, Qin Ruoying's slightly anxious heart immediately calmed down. As long as Chen Shi was there, she didn't have to worry about her and Nyanyan's safety at all. It had to be said that this feeling was very comfortable and at the same time, very reliable. In fact, as long as Chen Shi was there, not only the mother and daughter, but even the residents of this entire street would not be in any danger. After all, Chen Shi was not the kind of indifferent passerby who would not save someone in need. And speaking of which, wasn't it just a shake? What was the big deal? Chen Shi stood on the balcony and looked into the distance motionlessly. It was not until the third aftershock occurred that he suddenly turned around and returned to the living room. After briefly explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying and indicating that she did not have to worry, Chen Shi set up a series of restrictions in the room. Then, he directly left the house. He wanted to see what was the difference between this sudden heaven and earth anomaly and the previous two. After all, Chen Shi was not a weather satellite, and he did not have the leisure to explore heaven and earth anomalies, so he had no idea how many heaven and earth anomalies had occurred on Earth. Take the 2 times that he knew, the first time was in the Taklamakan Desert, and the second time was in the Siachen Glacier. Both times, heaven and earth anomalies appeared in the remote border areas. But this time, the heaven and earth anomaly appeared in Zhonghai, in this international metropolis with a total population of as many as 25 million people. One had to know that although ordinary people did not know how to cultivate, as the spirit of all things, humans still instinctively absorbed some heaven and earth spirit energy. Even if each person could only absorb a little, with such a large population base, the heaven and earth spirit energy in Zhonghai would naturally become very sparse. In this regard, Zhonghai and Shangjing could not be compared at all. Although the total population of Shangjing was as many as 20 million, Shangjing was the imperial capital of 5 dynasties. The emperors of each dynasty liked to choose Shangjing as their capital. It was precisely because Shangjing itself was a paradise, located at the head of the dragon veins, so no matter how large the population of Shangjing was, Zhonghai still had such rich heaven and earth spirit energy. Therefore, if there was a heaven and earth anomaly in Shangjing, Chen Shi would not be surprised at all. But the strange thing was that there was no heaven and earth anomaly in Shangjing, but in Zhonghai, a new city that had only been prosperous for 100 or 200 years, there was one. How could this not surprise Chen Shi? As he flew, Chen Shi pondered the question of why there would be a heaven and earth anomaly in Zhonghai. In fact, if you put aside the dragon veins, Zhonghai could really be considered a blessed land. Why? That was because, as a coastal city, Zhonghai rarely had natural disasters such as typhoons, earthquakes, and tsunamis since ancient times. It was close to the river, the sea, and the plains, far away from the earthquake zone, and there were multiple island chains in the outer sea to block tsunamis. Such a unique geographical advantage was extremely rare even in the world. Thinking about it carefully, other than the lack of the dragon veins and the sparse spirit energy, Zhonghai seemed to have no shortcomings. But these were only geographical advantages, and had nothing to do with heaven and earth spirit energy or heaven and earth anomalies. The more Chen-shi thought about it, the more confused he became. But at this moment, a flash of inspiration flashed in his mind, and he suddenly thought of a very important question. 5 years ago, wasn't it also during this thunderstorm that he suddenly went from Earth to Heavenly Jade? Thunderstorm? Spirit energy recovery? Heaven and Earth anomaly? Heavenly Jade world? The moment this question popped up, Chen-shi's figure suddenly stopped in midair. His entire body froze. For a long time. It was not until the sound of thunder sounded again that Chen-shi seemed to be awakened from his sleep by a gong. He could not help but exclaim. Chapter 280. 5 years ago. Chen-shi was just an ordinary person who couldn't be more ordinary. At that time, he had dreams, was willing to work hard, and could endure hardships. Although his life was a little shabby, he always thought that he was very happy and would be even happier in the future. Humans would always have hope for the future. Chen-shi always believed in an old saying, knowledge can change fate. But what he didn't expect was that before he could wait for the day when knowledge could change fate, a rainstorm had already changed his fate in advance. If it wasn't for the sudden thunderstorm, what would he be like now? Chen-shi didn't know. And no one could know. His fate was inexplicably changed just like that. Although the process was difficult, the ending seemed to be much better than before. After all, in the past, he only knew how to code, but now he could fly and burrow into the ground. Therefore, Chen-shi was really a little curious. Why did this great gift bag of changing fate fall on his head? Although he didn't know if there was a spirit energy tide on that rainstorm 5 years ago. But based on the scale of today's tide, the spirit energy contained in it was actually far from enough to instantly teleport a person from Earth to the Heavenly Jade world. Therefore, he could conclude that either the scale of the spirit energy tide 5 years ago was far greater than today, or there were still some unknown large-scale formations or magic treasures hidden in the super first-tier city of Zhonghai, and those formations and magic treasures were all intact legendary existences. In short, no matter what the reason was, the truth behind it was far from what he could pry into with his current strength. It hadn't been long since Chen-shi returned to Earth. But in this short period of half a year, he had already encountered a series of unimaginable things. And the question that puzzled him the most was, why was it that until today, except for an unknown divine general, he hadn't encountered anyone above the celestial being level? This didn't seem to make sense. Thinking of this, Chen-shi couldn't help but make a bold guess in his heart. Perhaps Earth was originally a cultivation planet similar to the Heavenly Jade world? Until one day, due to some unknown reason, the Earth's spirit chi dried up, so the Earth was completely reduced to a Vipralopa planet? For immortal cultivators, the planet of the last days was like an uninhabitable desert. Therefore, at this time, leaving Earth was obviously their only choice. The immortal cultivators on Earth had left, and the inheritances they left behind could not be cultivated at all because of the sparse spiritual energy. Therefore, they were gradually reconstructed and simplified, turning into a series of inheritances like necromancers, warriors, onmyoji, and so on. Chen-shi stroked his chin, faintly feeling that his guess might be somewhat close to the truth. It was probably because of the existence of high-level immortal cultivators on Earth that the Siakan Glacier had such a mysterious palace that could affect the flow of time. Chen-shi had already tasted the benefits of the Great Hall. Now that he suddenly realized that there might also be something of the same level as the Great Hall in Zhonghai, Chen-shi couldn't help but feel a little moved. The reason why he hadn't taken the initiative to search for them before was mainly because his soul had yet to recover from its injuries at that time. Without his divine sense, he couldn't just wander around this huge city by relying on his eyes alone, could he? Today, coincidentally, the spirit chi tide had appeared again. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to find that thing that had sent him to heavenly spiral from the surging spirit chi of heaven and earth. Chen-shi seriously pondered for a while in the sky. Then, as if he had made a decision, he directly flew towards the seaside. The reason why he wanted to go to the seaside was because the spirit chi on the seaside was much denser than in the city. It was obviously somewhat abnormal. Chen-shi quickly arrived at the seaside. However, before he had time to see the situation on the sea clearly, the sound of waves rumbled into his ears one after another. At this moment, the sky was already dark. Coupled with the dark clouds and torrential rain, there was not a single bit of light on the sea. Seeing this, Chen-shi immediately lit up a ball of light and threw it out. Only then did he finally see the situation on the sea clearly. He saw that the waves, which were more than 10 meters tall, were raised high like a wall of water. Then, they heavily slammed onto the shore. The waves came one after another, and the sound of waves crashing onto the shore came one after another. That majestic scene could be described as, rapid waves rise to the sky, raging waves roll to the ground. The majestic sound was like thunder, and the surging waves were like rolling snow. Fortunately, the torrential rain had driven away the tourists by the seaside. Otherwise, with the waves, which were more than 10 meters tall, coming wave after wave, who knew how many people would die on the spot? Looking at the situation, it seemed like there was a tsunami. However, from a scientific point of view, it was basically impossible for a tsunami to occur in Zhonghai. If there was a tsunami in Zhonghai, then the island country and the Gulf Coast in front of it would have become an underwater world by now. However, there was even an earthquake in Zhonghai today. What was so strange about a tsunami? Chen-shi didn't stay at the seaside for too long. After briefly checking the situation along the coast, he directly flew towards the depths of the sea. The spirit chi of heaven and earth was getting denser and denser. Could it be, this time, the heaven and earth phenomenon really appeared on the sea? Chen-shi frowned and looked at the sea surface as he continued to fly forward. After flying for about another 2 minutes, he finally arrived at the place where the spirit energy was the most concentrated. This location was no longer in Huaxia, but in the international waters of the Pacific Ocean. If he continued to fly forward, it wouldn't take long for him to reach Japan's territory. It was worth noting that even though Chen-shi had flown so far, he still hadn't flown out of the range of the thunderstorm. From this, it could be seen how huge the scale of this thunderstorm was. Chen-shi lit up another light ball. After looking around the surrounding environment, he descended to a height of about 10 meters above the sea surface. The sea surface below was very calm, and the slightly rippling sea surface seemed to be silently telling him, "There's nothing here." However, Chen-shi wasn't stupid. The coastal area had surging waves and raging waves crashing onto the shore, but here, the sea was calm and the waves were vast. Wasn't this strange enough? After seeing the heaven and earth phenomenon in the Siachen Glacier, he was already mentally prepared. Although he didn't know why there was no spirit fog here, in terms of the concentration of spirit energy, this place was not inferior to the Siachen Glacier at all. Therefore, Chen-shi could conclude that the heaven and earth phenomenon would definitely appear here. After confirming that there was nothing strange at the bottom of the sea, Chen-shi simply sat cross-legged on the sea surface, cultivating while silently waiting for the heaven and earth phenomenon to appear. After about an hour, he suddenly opened his eyes. There was finally movement on the sea surface. Chen-shi placed the light ball not far above the sea surface. Through the light emitted by the light ball, he could clearly see that a whirlpool suddenly appeared on the sea surface. The whirlpool was very small at first, and it looked like the whirlpool caused by a swimming pool when water was released. Its diameter was only about 50 centimeters. However, as time passed, the whirlpool began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. About 5 minutes later. Chapter 281. On the vast ocean, a huge whirlpool suddenly appeared. Under the illumination of the light ball, one could clearly see that the center of the whirlpool was rippling with white waves. The waves were surging, roaring, and howling. From afar, the whirlpool looked like a giant funnel. The slanted inner wall formed a 45-degree angle with the horizon. The waves, which had always been a symbol of beauty, now looked like sharp blades in a meat grinder, giving off a gloomy and terrifying feeling. In addition, there was a dark hole in the center of the whirlpool. When the light from the light ball shone into the hole, it was like shining into a bottomless abyss. The darkness swallowed everything, so much so that Chen-shi could only see the entrance of the hole. He couldn't see anything else. What kind of whirlpool was this? It was like a ferocious beast, opening its huge mouth full of sharp teeth and fiercely letting out a deafening roar towards the sky. From a scientific point of view, the larger the whirlpool, the greater its destructive power. In order to form such a huge whirlpool, it must contain an enormous amount of energy. Chen Shi was a top graduate from a top university in China, and he studied differential geometry in university. Unfortunately, at that time, he didn't have the photographic memory that he had now, so he had already returned the Stokes theorem and Maxwell-Faraday equations to his teacher. Now, he obviously couldn't calculate the strength of the whirlpool in front of him. However, even though he couldn't calculate the specific data, he could still make a bold guess. Based on the size of this whirlpool, which was thousands of meters in diameter, even if the United States Nimitz aircraft carrier came here, it would probably be instantly sucked into the whirlpool, then be turned into a pile of scrap metal by the sharp waves. After all, the Nimitz was only 300 meters long. In the face of such a huge whirlpool, what was the difference between an aircraft carrier and an ordinary fishing boat? It was just a question of who would sink first and who would sink later. The whirlpool in front of him was so dangerous, but Chen Shi didn't seem to care at all. Therefore, after a brief observation, he actually plunged into the pitch-black cave. One had to know that the center of the vortex had a high flow rate and low pressure, while the edge had a high flow rate and high pressure. There would be a huge pressure difference between the two. Under the effect of the pressure, the vortex could swallow everything that could be swallowed. This principle was quite similar to that of a black hole. Therefore, after Chen Shi flew into the center of the whirlpool, he immediately felt a huge pulling force coming from all directions. Although this power was strong enough to tear apart steel, to Chen Shi, it was still too childish. Thus, after using his true essence to prop up a barrier, Chen Shi sat in the center of the whirlpool and began to cultivate. The whirlpool spun rapidly like a black hole, constantly devouring the surrounding spiritual energy. Because of the appearance of the spirit chi tide today, the density of the spirit chi of heaven and earth was naturally countless times higher than before. In addition, the whirlpool was constantly devouring and compressing the surrounding spirit chi of heaven and earth. After the two overlapped, it actually caused the spirit chi of heaven and earth in the center of the whirlpool to directly condense from a gaseous state into a liquid state. Chen Shi originally thought that with his soul formation stage cultivation, he could absorb all the spirit chi of heaven and earth in less than 100 years. Now it seemed that this idea was indeed a bit too naive. It was simply a fool's dream. However, this was also good. At least he didn't have to hold back anymore and could finally go all out. Therefore, Chen Shi, who was sitting cross-legged in the center of the whirlpool, seemed to have turned into a glutton. The whirlpool was responsible for gathering the nearby spirit chi of heaven and earth for him, and he only needed to madly devour it. Because the spirit liquid was too pure, every drop contained a huge amount of spirit chi of heaven and earth. Therefore, in less than half an hour, Chen Shi actually successfully condensed a drop of blood essence. This was undoubtedly a great thing for him, who only had one drop of blood essence left. Previously, he had the soul crystal to nourish his divine soul. Now, he had the spirit liquid to condense his blood essence. At the same time, he also found a temple where the flow of time was different from the outside world. Since the recovery of the spirit chi, good things had been happening one after another. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but smile. At this rate, he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he could return to the peak and take a step towards the insightful emptiness realm. Chen Shi was happy for a while. He planned to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to condense the third drop of blood essence in one go in preparation for his future cultivation. However, at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. The pulling force of the whirlpool suddenly weakened, and the speed of the water in the center also began to rapidly slow down. This also caused the whirlpool to become smaller and smaller, just like when it first appeared. In less than a few minutes, the huge whirlpool actually shrank back to its original size. Chen Shi frowned and flew out of the sea. The spirit chi had not dissipated, but why did the whirlpool disappear? Chen Shi looked around in confusion. At this moment, a rumbling sound of thunder suddenly came from the sky. Boom! Thunder again. However, unlike before, the thunder appeared together with lightning. A bolt of lightning struck down from the sky and directly hit the center of the whirlpool. Immediately after, a cyclone slowly rose from the sea. As the cyclone became thicker and thicker, it also rose higher and higher. After a while, a waterspout rose from the sea just like that. Like the legendary pillar that supported the sky, this waterspout that suddenly rose from the ground actually went straight to the sky and was tightly connected with the thunderclouds in the sky. Boom! Accompanied by the sound of thunder, another bolt of lightning struck down from the sky and directly hit the waterspout that had just risen. The sky suddenly brightened, and countless snake-shaped lightning bolts shuttled back and forth in the waterspout. It looked particularly shocking. Chen-Shi finally understood. The whirlpool absorbed the spirit chi of heaven and earth. When the spirit chi accumulated to a certain extent, it would cause a waterspout. However, because he had swallowed most of the spirit chi, it took more than half an hour for the waterspout to condense and form. Well, it's better to wait and see what will happen today. Chen-Shi retreated a few hundred meters, temporarily distancing himself from the waterspout, ready to see what else would appear. However, at this moment, suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the sky. It was not thunder, but the sound of a plane. Chen-Shi looked up and saw a transport plane rushing out of the clouds in the distance. Then, the transport plane flew straight towards the waterspout in the heavy rain. This kind of thunderstorm weather was not conducive to flying, and coupled with the strong airflow near the waterspout, the transport plane did not dare to approach at all. Therefore, the transport plane glided in the air for a while before opening the cargo door, dropping something and turning around to leave. Chen-Shi looked carefully and found that the small black dot dropped by the transport plane from a height of thousands of meters was not cargo at all, but a... Chapter 282. A person. Just like an airdrop, he was directly dropped from the sky by a transport plane. With the help of a flash of lightning, Chen-Shi could clearly see that the person was only wearing a black combat suit. He didn't wear a parachute or a flight suit. After being dropped by the transport plane, the person spread out his hands and did a free fall in the sky. The height of the cumulonimbus cloud was generally between 600 and 2,000 meters. Tonight's thunderclouds gave people a strong sense of oppression, so it could be speculated that the height of the clouds tonight should be about 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters was actually not that high. It would take less than 15 seconds for an object to fall from a height of 1,000 meters. It was a short time, but the falling speed was very fast. When an object fell from a high altitude, due to the acceleration of gravity, the falling speed would become faster and faster. In contrast, the object would be subjected to greater and greater air resistance. When the air resistance reached a certain level, the air resistance would balance with gravity, causing the object to begin to move at a uniform speed. This speed was also called the ultimate speed or the finishing speed. Assuming that this person weighed 60 kilograms, then through the formula V equals, this person's ultimate speed would be 617 kilometers per hour. Falling into the sea at such a speed was no different from falling on a steel plate. With a smack sound, the person would probably be like a cake falling to the ground, instantly turning into a pool of paste. Of course, the above was only a hypothesis from a scientific point of view. Obviously, this outsider in front of him could not be judged by common sense. Sure enough, when the person fell into the sea, after the huge impact was offset by the seawater, he immediately got out of the sea as if nothing had happened. Then, he stepped on the stormy waves and went straight in the direction of Chen-Shi. He was indeed running. In ancient times, there was a Dharma crossing the river with a reed, but this person did not even use a reed. He just stepped on the waves and ran directly. This directly showed that he had broken through the limits of the human body and stood at the peak of martial arts. And this was the so-called celestial. Chen-Shi floated in the air more than 10 meters above the sea and quietly watched the person running towards him. It was a man who looked about 30 years old. Although he was wearing a combat suit, he did not have any badge to prove his identity. This was not Huaxia's territory, but a public area in the world. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, any country had the right to interrogate and search stateless people and ships on the high seas. Therefore, this kind of behavior that did not even reveal his identity was actually very eye-catching. However, looking at his face, this man should be Huaxia's person. The man ran wildly on the waves and soon came not far below Chen-Shi. With the light ball around Chen-Shi, the man saw Chen-Shi's appearance. Immediately after that, he could not help but show a smile on his face and shouted excitedly, "Mr. Chin, I didn't expect it's you." His voice was so loud that even the sound of the stormy waves was drowned out. But what made him feel strange was that She did not immediately respond after hearing his words. Instead, he stretched out his hand and pointed to the sea in the distance. Seeing this, the man immediately turned his head and looked in the direction She pointed with some doubts. Perhaps because the sky was too dark and his vision was limited, the man looked for a while and did not find anything strange. Just when he was a little puzzled, a few strong lights suddenly appeared on the horizon in the distance. It was the light beam emitted by the military hernia searchlight. The rated power of 15 million watts also made the range of this searchlight reach up to 2,000 meters. It was also a necessary device for ships cruising at sea. As the searchlight's light became brighter and brighter, the man finally saw the appearance of the ship. It was a destroyer with the flag of the United States. Looking at the aggressive posture, it should be the American Army stationed in Okinawa. The rain poured down, and the thunder rumbled in the sky. The waterspout, like a pillar supporting the sky, seemed to have taken root and did not move from beginning to end. After the destroyer shone its searchlight on the waterspout from a distance, it immediately anchored 2 kilometers away. It seemed that it did not dare to get closer. However, although the destroyer did not dare to get closer, it still released a patrol boat. Afterward, the boat rushed straight in the direction of the waterspout with an unstoppable momentum. The sea today was not calm. There were whirlpools and waterspouts, and the waves were at least 3 or 4 meters high. But for some reason, even if the boat was about to be lifted up by the waves, it was able to fall back to the water safely in the end, and then continue to move forward. The waterspout rotated at high speed, like a giant dragon, constantly sucking the sea water from the sea to the sky. In the face of such a huge suction force, not to mention the boat, even the destroyer would be sent to the sky in an instant after approaching. It was unknown who the helmsman of this boat was, but the control of the boat and the judgment of the distance were extremely accurate. Therefore, under the delicate control of the helmsman, the moment the boat was about to enter the edge of the waterspout, it suddenly turned the bow, and then began to circle around the waterspout in a very extreme way. This was already the last safe distance. If the boat was a little closer to the waterspout, it was possible that it would be directly sucked into the turbulence of the waterspout and then sent to the sky. The boat maintained the last safe distance, and then began to circle around the waterspout. Perhaps it was because the light ball around She was too eye-catching. The people on the boat immediately noticed him. Then, a deep voice came from the small boat. "Ha ha ha, I didn't expect Mr. Chin to be here. What a coincidence. Inyang Liao's deputy Inyang assistant, Ijiro Saito, greets you, sir." It was the original recipe, and the familiar smell. Ever since the last time he drove away Shintaro Abe, Shi had not encountered anyone from Inyang Liao. He did not expect to see them again today in the vast Pacific Ocean. And listening to his self-introduction, this Ijiro Saito, who had not yet appeared in front of him, seemed to be a level higher than Shintaro Abe. Shi floated in the air, quietly watching the various forces come one after another. After looking down at the small boat that was quickly approaching him, he looked up at the destroyer in the distance with the U.S. military flag flying over it. Even the United States was here. Looking at the star-spangled flag hanging high on the mast of the destroyer, Shi suddenly had a seemingly irrelevant question in his mind. Since Hua Xia had martial artists, Inyang masters in Japan, Brahmins in India, and even tame head masters in Southeast Asia. Chapter 283. After hearing Ijiro's greeting, Shi didn't respond to him. After all, as a Hua Xia man, he would always feel some hostility towards a strange Japanese. In contrast, the Hua Xia man in front of him was obviously easier to get Shi's approval. Therefore, after looking around, Shi focused his attention on the Hua Xia man in front of him. Then he sat cross-legged in the air, lowered his head and said to him, "Look, they even brought a warship here, but you're all alone. Don't you think it's a bit too shabby?" Hearing this, the man shook his head and smiled bitterly. His name was Qin Shui, one of the main people in charge of the Wu Lian branch in Zhonghai, in charge of intelligence. Qin Shui had just stepped into the diviner stage, so his realm was not very stable, so his rating in the Wu Lian was only S-. The reason why he came here alone was because this was not a mission issued by the Wu Yan, but his own personal action. Tonight, there were all kinds of almost impossible natural disasters in Zhonghai, so the Wu Yan branch of Zhonghai naturally had to be dispatched to prevent any uncontrollable accidents. Qin Shui originally had a mission, but as the only diviner in the Zhonghai branch, he was keenly aware of a huge amount of energy at sea, so he mobilized a transport plane to send him here to check the situation. But what Qin Shui didn't expect was that when he arrived at the destination, he saw a person here. When Qin Shi's family traveled, they never deliberately hid their identity, so Qin Shui always knew that Qin Shi was in Zhonghai. Therefore, when he first saw the figure, Qin Shui subconsciously thought that this person should be Qin Shi, so he changed his original plan and directly jumped out of the plane. The result was as he expected. The person in front of him was indeed Qin Shi. Everyone in the Wu Yan branch knew about the new EX level existence. Qin Shui made a simple self-introduction, after which Qin Shi nodded slightly and then asked, "Can you fly?" Qin Shi was about 10 meters above the sea, about 3 or 4 stories high, so Qin Shui could only slightly raise his head when talking to him. After hearing Qin Shi's words, Qin Shui was stunned for a moment, then he replied with a troubled expression, "Yes, but not for too long. As far as Qin Shui knew, if it wasn't necessary, he would never fly." After all, for a martial artist, this kind of meaningless consumption was actually the same as an athlete who had to play a game the next day. "Oh, okay." After hearing Qin Shui's words, Qin Shi gently waved his hand. Immediately after, a gentle force surrounded Qin Shui. Qin Shui's body suddenly. Because he knew that Qin Shi wouldn't attack him for no reason, he didn't resist too fiercely. So, he just stared blankly as Qin Shi lifted him into the air. This action of course, this action, Thus. It's really not as good as seeing it in person. As the waterspout continued to rotate, the density of the world's spiritual energy also began to rise, and soon it reached the level of the vortex just now. The tide of spiritual energy is extremely rare. Even Qin Shi wanted to take this opportunity to heal the injuries in his body, let alone Qin Shui. Therefore, under Qin Shi's guidance, Qin Shui sat cross-legged in the air and began to silently cultivate. Although Qin Shui didn't have a complete set of immortal cultivation methods, after all, he had reached the level of a celestial, so he had faintly grasped some of the principles of heaven and earth, and instinctively wanted to absorb the world's spiritual energy into his body. On the other side, Saito Ijiro sent a polite greeting to Qin Shi, but Qin Shi didn't respond, which made him quite dissatisfied, so he ignored Qin Shi and sat on the small boat to cultivate. At the same time, not far away on a destroyer, several heavily armed soldiers were standing in the cockpit, silently observing everything in front of them. These soldiers were all blonde United States people, and most of them were more than 1.9 meters tall. Compared to the ordinary staff in the cockpit, they looked like giants. One of the soldiers was holding a tablet in his hand, and he was constantly pointing on it. "Reporting, Captain, the energy index is still rising, and it will reach the expected peak in about 10 minutes. Very good, continue to observe." "Did you find the information of the 2 Huaxia people?" "Yes, one is called Qin Shui, S-, and the other is called Qin Shi, EX. Hearing this, the leading soldier couldn't help but frown slightly. "Yes, we don't have relevant information in our database. This is the strength evaluation given by Enyang Liao." "What's the basis of the evaluation?" "There's only one battle video so far, let me see." After that, the captain-like man took the tablet from his companion and clicked on the video. The video was taken by a surveillance satellite, and the location was in the Golden Triangle, Meimen. The video was divided into several segments, one of which was the scene where Qin Shi crushed the missile with one hand. The video was very short, only 10 seconds long. After watching it, the man called the captain couldn't help but sneer. "This is the so-called mysterious power of the East?" "Eric, what do you think?" Translation, not bad, not bad. Note, in the future, foreigners will use the only official language of the universe, Chinese. After that, the man called Eric shrugged his shoulders with a look of disdain. To be honest, even trash like Ijiro Saito can get an S rating from Enyang Liao, so I don't think this strength evaluation is credible. When he said this, his companion couldn't help but laugh. As the only superpower in the world, the people of the United States were naturally born with pride. The Japanese were a very strange people. They didn't seem to hate the United States who dropped the atomic bomb. Instead, they felt that the United States was the savior of Japan. Many fanatics even praised the United States with gratitude. Therefore, Ijiro Saito was very humble in front of the people of the United States. But what Ijiro Saito didn't expect was that his humility lowered his evaluation in the hearts of the people of the United States, and even affected the credibility of Enyang Liao's strength evaluation. As time went by, the waterspout did not become smaller, but thicker and thicker. About half an hour later, the energy contained in the waterspout seemed to have reached its limit. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the waterspout. The waterspout immediately became like an electrified light tube, and light blue snake-shaped electric arcs flashed wildly in it. A huge amount of energy filled it, and the waterspout suddenly expanded more than 10 meters outward at a speed visible to the naked eye. It looked like it was about to explode. Qin Shui opened his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. Before he could recover, he was pulled back by Qin Shi and instantly retreated hundreds of meters away. At this time, the waterspout also began to shake violently. Qin Shui had never seen such a scene, so he couldn't help but ask, what's going on? However, before Qin Shi could answer his question, the waterspout in front of him suddenly changed again. The originally thick waterspout suddenly separated from the sky and became two in an instant. The two waterspouts rotated and intersected, spiraling straight into the sky, and their shape looked somewhat similar to a fried dough twist. Qin Shi frowned slightly, because he suddenly found that all the surrounding spiritual energy was madly rushing towards the center of the two waterspouts. And with the continuous influx of spiritual energy, a bright light suddenly appeared in a position in the middle of the two waterspouts. The light was white, and at first it was only the size of a star. But after a few breaths, the light suddenly burst into an extremely dazzling light. Like the rising sun, it instantly dispelled all the haze between heaven and earth. Such a dazzling light suddenly made Qin Shui couldn't help but close his eyes and slightly tilt his head, not daring to look at it again. But Qin Shi didn't seem to be affected at all. She raised her head slightly and calmly looked at the source of the light. Finally. Chapter 284. The two waterspouts spiraled into the sky. Rumbling sounds of thunder rang out one after another. When the lightning struck the huge water tornadoes, countless light blue electric currents immediately surged wildly within the water tornadoes, so much so that the two water tornadoes faintly glowed with blue light. Then, the electric currents in the water columns suddenly converged at the center of the waterspouts, emitting a faint white light that looked like stars at night. With the continuous influx of spirit energy, the white light suddenly became like the sun, bursting with an extremely dazzling light. The white light dispelled the dark haze between heaven and earth, and even the thunderstorm that had not stopped just now strangely stopped. This was really a very strange scene. It was around 9 o'clock in the evening, and the sun had already drilled from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. But under the white light, it seemed to bring people to a sunny afternoon. The wind was gentle, the sun was bright, and the sea was blue. The salty sea breeze kept slapping on their faces. If there were no two violent waterspouts, the whole scene could be said to be perfect. The two waterspouts continued to revolve around the ball of light, just like two gigantic dragons that were having fun. Flood dragons going to the sea. Two dragons playing with a pearl. After Qin Shi pulled Qin Shui back a few hundred meters, he looked up at the strong light. But after a mere 10 seconds, he suddenly realized that a black shadow suddenly appeared in the strong light. This familiar scene immediately made Qin Shi frown deeply. But in an instant, many thoughts flashed through his mind. Spirit energy exhaustion, strange phenomenon of heaven and earth, spirit energy recovery, heaven opening. His cheap father-in-law once said that the heavenly gate had not appeared for more than 100 years. In the understanding of great-granduncle and the others, the heavenly gate was the southern gate of the heavenly court. Just like in myths and legends, when the heavenly gate opened, mortals could ascend and become immortals. Chen Shi originally thought that with the spirit energy situation on Earth, it was absolutely impossible to breed high-level immortal cultivators, so he had never taken the Heavenly Gate issue to heart. In Chen Shi's understanding, the Elysium was just a legend on Earth. But combined with the recent series of events, he had finally figured it out. Even though there were no immortal cultivators on Earth now, it didn't mean that there weren't any in the past. They just left. He went to a place called the Heavenly Gate by later generations. Weren't those old fogies in the village dreaming of the day when the gate of heaven would open again and take them to the celestial world? The Heavenly Gate should be a large-scale teleportation array. Xian Nu's spirit was the coordinates of the array that connected the two realms. As for the so-called immortal realm, it was probably a cultivation holy land similar to the Heavenly Jade domain. Because the spiritual energy on Earth was too sparse, the only way to maintain the connection between the two realms was to sacrifice Xian Nu's soul. As for that immortal general who had been killed, Chen Shi thought that he was a helper that those old B** stars had found from somewhere. Come to think of it, divine generals, weren't they the immortal cultivators who left Earth? Otherwise, with the current cultivation conditions on Earth, the celestial being was already the limit. How could a divine general comparable to Yuanning be born? In the blink of an eye, Chen Shi sorted out the conjectures in his mind. Because he left Earth, when he returned, he never thought that his home planet was actually a cultivation holy land similar to the Heavenly Jade domain. At this moment, Chen Shi's heart was filled with mixed feelings, and an indescribable feeling suddenly gushed out. One had to know that his current state of mind was completely different from when he first returned. Because he had Nian, and at the same time, he had found Ying. They were a happy family. Chen Shi had always been someone who cared about his wife and children. As long as the people he cared about were by his side, everything else did not matter. With the cultivation conditions on Earth, he might not be able to take another step toward the soul formation stage in this lifetime. However, Chen Shi did not feel regret. Instead, he was optimistic that as long as Ying could cultivate to Yuanning, he would be very satisfied. Chen Shi even thought that if Ying really could not cultivate to Yuanning, he could reluctantly accept the golden core stage. After all, 500 years was not a long time. A family could live happily together for 500 years, what kind of concept was that? Furthermore, even if he really could not accept the terrible ending of Ying leaving first and dying alone, he could at least try to bring Ying and Nian back to the Heavenly Jade domain and find a way to prolong their lives, right? The future was still early, and it was more important to live well in the present. Therefore, before Nian became an adult, Chen Shi would not consider what the future would be like. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was that reality was completely different from what he had imagined. Originally, he just wanted to retire and take care of his children on Earth. But he did not expect Earth to be a cultivation holy land comparable to the Heavenly Jade domain, at least, it used to be. This made Chen Shi feel that it was very unreal. Could it be, his peaceful and happy life was going to be broken? And the reason why Chen Shi had such a feeling was that he knew how cruel the world of immortal cultivators was. Immortal cultivators were supposed to compete with the heavens and with people. Although there would always be people who naively thought that immortal cultivators could actually join hands and advance together, side by side. However, they neglected the most important problem. And that was, cultivation resources were limited. Although spirit chi could be continuously regenerated, and heavenly treasures could be regenerated indefinitely, the problem was, the lifespan of immortal cultivators was also limited. How to obtain more cultivation resources within their limited lifespan to continuously improve their realm was the problem that every immortal cultivator had to face. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. If one could not obtain more resources to improve themselves, then they were destined to be eliminated. What was the result of being eliminated? There was only one result, and that was death. This was the real world of immortal cultivators. Compared to the other divine lords in the Heavenly Jade domain, Chen Shi's temperament was indeed much gentler, but he was not a person who liked to avoid problems. Since the problem had already appeared, then there was only one question left in his heart. Divine General. What level was he in the Heavenly Gate? The grudge had already been formed. If the other party did not pursue the matter, then Qin Shi could also pretend that this matter did not happen. But if the other party wanted to pursue the matter, thinking of this, Qin Shi could not help but ignite a burning desire to fight in his heart. In the past, he did not care about his life, and even if it was a narrow escape, he would still cross the void. But today was different from the past. As a man, every time he swung his sword, it was no longer for himself, but for his wife and children behind him. If he were to fall as well, what would happen to Yingying and Ningyan? Qin Shi's mind was full of thoughts. At this time, the black figure finally walked out of the strong light. But what made Qin Shi a little surprised was Chapter 285. Two dragons playing with a pearl, the heavens opened a gate. Qin Shi originally wanted to pick up some scraps from this heavenly vision. If he could find another strange existence like the Temple of Time, it would be a very happy thing for him. But it was a pity, he didn't find anything good. Instead, he witnessed the entire process of the Gate of Heaven. With the opening of the Gate of Heaven, 3 figures also walked out of the strong light one after another. Walking in front was a man wearing a blue brocade robe and a belt around his waist. He was about 30 years old. After walking out of the strong light, the man in blue took a few steps in the air, then slightly turned his body to look at the strong light, as if waiting for his companions. Then, another man walked out of the strong light. That person was wearing a white straight crane cloak. Coupled with the otherworldly temperament on his body, it could be said that he was a stranger like Jade, unparalleled in the world. The man in white's temperament was so outstanding, but the third figure following behind him was not inferior in the slightest. Moreover, it was a woman. The woman was very thin, with prominent cheekbones. She was wearing a water blue fairy dress and had a cinnabar dot between her eyebrows. She looked a bit like Man Shen in The Promise. If one had to use a word to describe her, it could only be Kufu. This kind of face was indeed very unlikable, but if coupled with the cold and otherworldly temperament on her body, it brought a different kind of beauty. 2 men and 1 woman. They were all dressed very strangely. At least in the eyes of modern people in the 21st century, they were simply like ancient characters who walked out of an ink painting. The 3 seemed to be led by the woman who appeared last. After the woman appeared, she arrogantly scanned the surroundings. When she saw Qin Shi dragging Qin Shuai and flying in the air more than 10 meters above the sea, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but raise a slightly contemptuous smile. However, after briefly sizing up Qin Shi and Qin Shuai, the woman quickly withdrew her gaze and then took out something similar to a magic weapon from her arms. That thing was spherical, about the size of a palm, and had a metallic texture. There were many strange symbols engraved on the spherical surface. After the woman took out the small ball, a faint fluorescent light emerged from her palm. Then, the small ball floated up strangely. At this moment, the woman said to the 2 companions beside her, "There's a problem. The spiritual chi is much less than I thought. Based on the current situation, we only have the time for an incense stick to burn at most." Hearing this, the man in green immediately asked doubtfully, "An incense stick's worth of time? Didn't you say that we have at least 2 hours? I don't know what's going on," the woman frowned. After thinking for a while, she explained, "Hun Xiang's judgment can't be wrong. I think it's because there are too many impurities in this world's spiritual energy, which caused the previous judgment to be wrong. Now is not the time to discuss this. Since time is so tight, let's act according to what we discussed before. Shui Xiang will guard this place. I'll go find Gui Yao. Qing Wan, you go find Chang Li. What do you think?" "All right." After hearing the man in white's words, the woman and the man in green immediately nodded. If great-granduncle was still alive, perhaps he could determine the identities of the 3 people in front of him based on the contents recorded in the ancient books. Shui Xiang, Qing Wan, Bai Hong. And the divine general who had died under Qin Shi's sword combination, Chang Li. After a simple discussion, Qing Wan and Bai Hong instantly turned into streaks of light and flew in different directions. From the beginning to the end, the 2 of them didn't even look at Qin Shi. Perhaps to them, Qin Shi and Qin Shuai in front of them were just insects that could fly. Qing Wan and Bai Hong left. But the moment they left, the destroyer that had been parked in the distance suddenly raised its main cannon. Bang! Following the appearance of a burst of flames, the destroyer actually opened fire. And the position the cannon was aiming at was the strong light in the middle of the two waterspouts. One had to know that the woman called Shui Xiang was currently floating in the air at the location of the strong light. This sudden cannon shot really shocked everyone present. Sitting on the boat, Ijiro Saito stared in the direction of the destroyer in a daze. When he saw the cannonball smashing toward the position of the strong light at 3 times the speed of sound, Ijiro Sato's face suddenly showed a shocked and angry expression. He couldn't help but yell in the direction of the destroyer, "Baka!" With the continuous development of modern technology, the status of naval cannons had long been replaced by missiles. Therefore, naval cannons were generally only used in close-range defensive battles or warning shots. This cannon shot was a warning issued by the U.S. Army. It was a warning to the 3 people who suddenly appeared from the strong light not to act rashly and obediently accept their interrogation. The firing rate of naval cannons was as high as 1,000 meters per second. Therefore, in less than 2 seconds, the cannonball had already hit the woman's position. The woman was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect the insects in front of her to dare to attack her. Because she was too angry, a hint of red flashed across the woman's face. Then, she waved her sleeves fiercely, frowned, and widened her eyes. She shouted in the direction of the destroyer, "You're asking for it." As the woman waved her sleeves, she grabbed with her slender hand and a huge burst of energy suddenly burst out. The cannonball that had already flown in front of her suddenly stopped in the air as if it had hit a wall of air. Then, the 2 waterspouts seemed to have come alive. They fiercely poked their heads down from the sky and pointed at the destroyer in the shape of a bow. From afar, how were these waterspouts? They were simply 2 flood dragons that were ready to pounce. As the woman pointed from afar, 2 waterspouts immediately shot forth, spiraling toward the destroyer viciously. Flood dragons emerge from the sea, swallowing thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. In the face of this monstrous wave, what was the difference between the destroyer and a wooden boat? Boom! With the rumbling sound of the waves, the overwhelming wave instantly slammed the destroyer to the bottom of the sea. When everything returned to silence, there was nothing left on the vast ocean. Chapter 286. There was an old saying in Huaxia, the police of the Pacific Ocean were very strict. The people of the United States had always been arrogant and self-proclaimed to be the world's overlords. They would go to other people's territory in the name of maintaining world peace. Naturally, many countries were angry but didn't dare to say anything. It just so happened that the heavenly vision appeared in the high seas not far from Okinawa, so the people of the United States naturally came to join in the fun. But what these people of the United States would never have thought was that they kicked a steel plate this time. The woman was called Shui Xiang by her companions, and with her skill just now, She also guessed that her cultivation method should be inclined to the water attribute. Therefore, the endless Pacific Ocean in front of him was obviously her home ground. Provoking others in their home ground, and the other party was a celestial being. What was the difference between such behavior and the kamikaze squad of Japan? She silently played the role of a spectator. In fact, since these 3 people appeared, he had been seriously thinking about a problem. That was, should he make the first move to gain the upper hand? Perhaps because they were bold, the 3 of them didn't set up any soundproof restrictions when they were discussing things just now. Therefore, the conversation between the 3 of them was also passed to Shi's ears. Deo? Chun-Li? Although he didn't know what these 2 terms meant, it could be speculated that one of them should refer to the divine general who had died under his sword. The 3 of them obviously didn't know that the divine general was dead, so they only mentioned looking for him, not revenge. In that case, then, should he take advantage of the opportunity when they were acting separately and kill the 3 of them one by one? Or should he keep his composure and pretend that nothing had happened? Shi thought about this problem very seriously. Just when he was hesitating, the woman suddenly turned her head and looked at him and Qin Shui. At this moment, within a radius of 10 miles, except for Saito Ijiro on the boat, only Qin Shui and Shi were left. Qin Shui was just a warrior who had just stepped into the celestial realm, so the woman didn't take him seriously at all. As for Qin Shi on the side, because she couldn't detect any fluctuation of spirit energy from Qin Shi, she only thought of Qin Shi as Qin Shuai's follower. The woman's temper was not very good to begin with, and after being provoked by a group of ants, she was even more furious. Thus, when she saw the small boat below, she couldn't help but wave her sleeves again. Immediately after, a huge wave rose from the sea below and smashed directly in the direction of the small boat. Seeing this, Ijiro Saito didn't even care about the boat. He jumped into the sea, and then ran wildly on the water. The wind is tight, retreat. The woman had only casually raised a huge wave, and it was enough to frighten this Enyang Liao executive, who scrambled away like a dog. Fortunately, the woman didn't seem to want to argue with these ants in front of her, so when she saw Ijiro running away, she turned her eyes back to Qin Shi and Qin Shuai. This was the third time she had set her eyes on the two of them. Therefore, the moment she looked at Qin Shuai, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave, and all the hair on his body stood on end. Seeing this, Qin Shuai could only tilt his head slightly and whisper to Qin Shi, "Mr. Qin, how about, let's go?" Although Qin Shuai didn't know what level of strength the woman in front of him had reached, he knew very well, this woman was definitely not someone he could mess with, so he subconsciously wanted to leave here. Qin Shuai proposed his idea, but Qin Shi didn't seem to hear him. Instead, he turned his head and looked in the direction of the destroyer with interest. At the same time, the woman in the air seemed to have noticed something, so she quickly turned her head and saw 2 missiles suddenly shot out of the sea. The missiles broke through the surface of the sea, and after flying to a certain height, they suddenly turned the warhead and blasted directly in the direction of the woman. At the same time as the missiles were fired, several figures suddenly emerged from the bottom of the sea. It was the group of United States soldiers. But what was strange was that these soldiers were all wearing a set of metal armor-like equipment at the moment, so from a distance, they looked like a group of robot soldiers. This should be the exoskeleton armor secretly developed by the United States. I didn't expect this technology to be mature enough to be used in actual combat. Qin Shuai's reaction was also extremely fast. After seeing the appearance of this group of robot soldiers, he quickly explained to Qin Shi. Mechanical exoskeleton armor. This was a project that the United States had been deeply researching and developing in recent years. The purpose was to allow ordinary soldiers to have extraordinary combat capabilities. Qin Shi's eyesight was much better than Qin Shuai's, so he saw it very clearly. The shape of these exoskeleton armors was somewhat similar to the mass-produced version of Iron Man 2. The United States had only been founded for more than 200 years, so naturally, they didn't have as deep a cultural heritage as Huaxia. Although they didn't have martial artists or necromancers, they could make ordinary soldiers have the strength to fight with martial artists through research and technology. And once the research and development was successful, it meant mass production. Because of the root aptitude and other reasons, ordinary people may not be able to reach transforming strength in their lifetime. But as long as they wore the exoskeleton armor, even ordinary people could instantly have the powerful strength of a transforming strength warrior. It was conceivable that an army composed entirely of transforming strength warriors would be so formidable. This was the fundamental reason why the United States were so domineering. Because Shui Xiang directly smashed the destroyer, it was obvious that she and the United States were in a situation where one of them had to die. Looking at the dense rocket barrage constantly bombarding Shui Xiang, Qin Shuai was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. Even Qin Shi couldn't help but think of a joke at this moment that made him feel a little bit awkward. Iron Man vs. the Ancient Cultivators? Boom! 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 After 2 missiles, countless shoulder-fired rockets bombarded the woman in mid-air one after another. Like fireworks during the New Year, the rockets continued to explode one after another. In an instant, the thick smoke produced by the explosion filled the entire sky. The United States were rich, so they were never stingy with ammunition. Therefore, after a full round of bombardment, the leading soldier finally raised his right hand, clenched his fist, and made a gesture to stop the attack. But the moment they stopped the bombardment, a scream full of anger suddenly resounded throughout the sky. Chapter 287. With Shui Xiang's angry rebuke, a strong wind blew on the surface of the sea. The sea wind howled and the waves roared. Since the sun set, the vast Pacific Ocean seemed to have never been calm. In just a few breaths, the strong wind swept away the billowing smoke caused by the explosion. Then, Shui Xiang's figure slowly emerged from the thick smoke. Although she was bombarded by the United States, there was no sign of injury on her body, as if she was not here at all. In fact, Shui Xiang's appearance was beautiful, but she always faintly gave people a feeling of acrimony and being unapproachable. In the words of the aunt in the park who arranged a blind date for her son, it was, "This girl's face was not good, she would jinx her husband, marrying her home would shorten his lifespan." As for whether Shui Xiang jinxed her husband or not, obviously, no one knew the answer to this question. However, Qin Shi and Qin Shui, who were onlookers, knew very well that the group of United States people in front of them were all going to become short-lived ghosts. Shui Xiang floated in the air expressionlessly. Her face, which looked a little rosy just now, became a little pale at the moment. She looked like a sick patient in the hospital. Of course, she was not sick. If Qing Wan and Bai Hong were still here, they would immediately dodge to the side and carefully keep a safe distance from her. After all, a woman was very scary when she went crazy. Because of the existence of the protective shield, this level of bombardment was actually no different from scratching an itch for Shui Xiang. And the reason why she was so angry was entirely because she didn't expect that these damn ants would dare to provoke her again and again. She felt as if a mangy dog was barking around her, and from time to time, it would pounce on her and bite her. Even if it couldn't bite her, it still successfully disgusted her. Therefore, when Shui Xiang waved her sleeves again with a cold face, the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot. Then, the sea surface where the United States soldiers were located surged violently. Immediately afterward, a huge force suddenly surged out from the bottom of the sea. Before the soldiers could react, they were directly sprayed into the sky by this force. Thrusters. Spread out, spread out. Attack at will. With the help of the thrusters, the soldiers were like hornets flying up and down in the air. At the same time, they were crazily firing at Shui Xiang's location. Boom! In an instant, bullets gushed out like raindrops. At the same time, countless rocket launchers were launched one after another at Shui Xiang. A new round of suppressive fire began. However, just as they were about to launch their attacks, the sea beneath them suddenly began to boil. Countless tiny water arrows shot out from the sea at an extremely fast speed, looking somewhat like a fountain. A dense rain of water arrows shot from the sea into the sky. Because a soldier couldn't dodge in time, he was pierced by those tiny water arrows on the spot. Accompanied by a heart-wrenching scream, the unlucky soldier fell from the sky like a wild goose that had been shot by an arrow. Pull up! Pull up! The thrusters were fully activated, and the remaining soldiers instantly flew hundreds of meters into the air. But it was a pity, although their flying speed was fast, the water arrows shot from the sea were much faster than them. Therefore, in just a few seconds, more than half of this elite team whose combat power could be said to be the world's top elite team had been killed or injured. Calling headquarters, requesting, seeing that the situation was not right, the leading soldier immediately wanted to ask for support from headquarters. But before he could even finish speaking, a water arrow comparable to a laser directly pierced through the exoskeleton armor on his body. Blood rained down, and the entire world was quiet. Shui Xiang turned her head again and looked at the two people not far away. This was already the fourth time she looked at Qin Shi and Qin Shui. Therefore, Qin Shui suddenly felt like he was being stared at by a prehistoric beast. This also made him finally realize that death was so close to him. Under Shui Xiang's expressionless gaze, Qin Shui didn't even dare to breathe. Every second felt like a year. But luckily for him, after Shui Xiang stared at them for a full 3 seconds, she didn't attack the two of them. Instead, she spat out a word coldly. Get out. Hearing this, Qin Shui suddenly felt like he had been pardoned. In a moment of excitement, he grabbed Qin Shi's arm a little rudely, and then quickly whispered, Mr. Qin, let's go, if we don't go now. I'm afraid we won't be able to leave. To be honest, if it weren't for Qin Shi's reluctance to leave, he would have already run away like Ijiro Saito. It was fine to watch the show, but he couldn't throw his life away, right? Perhaps sensing the fear in Qin Shuai's heart, Shi didn't mean to blame him. Instead, he reached out and patted the back of his hand. You go first, I still have something to talk to her alone. Before Qin Shuai could react, an invisible force pushed him out. Mr. Chen. You? Qin Shuai struggled, wanting to say something, but his mouth was blocked by Chen Shi's true essence. This scene also made Shui Xiang, who had been expressionless, instantly change her expression. This man, who didn't have the slightest fluctuation of spirit energy on his body, was actually a celestial being. Did she make an error in judgment? Shui Xiang was a little bewildered. But at this time, Chen Shi was like a tourist climbing a mountain. Step by step, he walked in the air and slowly rose to Shui Xiang's height. Who are you? Until now, Shui Xiang hadn't noticed any signs of spirit energy fluctuations on Chen Shi's body. How was this possible? Shui Xiang frowned slightly, and the expression on her face couldn't help but become much more dignified. Chen Shi heard Shui Xiang's question, but he didn't mean to answer. Instead, he asked, Do you know, there is a weapon in this world called a nuclear bomb? What is it? It seems that you don't know. Looking at Shui Xiang's puzzled face, Chen Shi didn't mean to explain. Instead, he continued, Actually, I'm very curious. Can you withstand a nuclear bomb attack? Hearing this, a trace of displeasure flashed across Shui Xiang's face. Although she didn't know what a nuclear bomb was, since the man in front of her mentioned the word weapon and attack, it naturally aroused her vigilance. Pretending to be mysterious, then I'll test how strong you are. Following a cold snort, Shui Xiang's slender hand moved, and a water arrow suddenly shot out from the sea. Seeing this, Chen Shi didn't move at all. Instead, he said calmly, under normal circumstances, I don't fight with women, but in order to avoid unnecessary trouble in the future, I can only tell you today, I'm sorry. As his voice fell, a long sword suddenly appeared in Chen Shi's hand. Dharma. Chapter 288. Shui Xiang couldn't help but frown the moment she saw the appearance of the godly sword Dharma form. You actually used the Dharma form as a weapon? There was some doubt in her tone, but at the same time, there was some amazement. Without a doubt, Shui Xiang understood the usage of the Dharma form very well. But it was precisely because of this that she felt rather surprised. Dharma form, it could actually be used like this? Shui Xiang had never seen anyone use the Dharma form as a weapon since she started cultivating. Could it be that this mysterious man in front of her didn't even have a suitable Dharma treasure weapon? Or was it because this man didn't even put her in his eyes, so he didn't even want to use a Dharma treasure? The moment this conjecture appeared in Shui Xiang's mind, she couldn't suppress the raging anger in her heart. He was just an ant from the lower realm, and he actually dared to look down on her like this? He was simply arrogant to the extreme. I originally didn't want to kill more people, but you insisted on committing suicide. Since that's the case, then I'll do as you wish and personally send you on your way. As her voice fell, Shui Xiang stretched out her right hand and pointed fiercely at Chen Shi. Then, the aqua-blue cloak that had been wrapped around her hand suddenly seemed to come alive. After it circled around her arm, it was like a little blue snake that shot straight towards Chen Shi. The so-called cloak referred to the silk and satin gauze that ancient women wrapped around their arms. It could also be called a long damask and was purely a decorative item. The woman held the cloak in her hand. When she stood, the cloak naturally hung down like a calm pool of water. When she walked, it fluttered and stretched like a willow tree in the wind. How beautiful was the combination of movement and stillness. Shui Xiang danced with the long damask, like a fairy flying out of a Dunhuang mural. Seeing this, Chen Shi didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating her. Instead, he gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and ferociously channeled all the vital energy in his body into the long sword. So much so that the long sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a strong light. And the reason why Chen Shi was so cautious was because this cloak was Shui Xiang's natal Dharma treasure, azure billowing silk gauze. After the long damask flew out from Shui Xiang's hand, it suddenly became bigger and instantly became like a curtain that covered the entire sky. Seeing that the situation was not right, Qinshi immediately rose into the air, wanting to fly out of the area covered by the long silk. However, what Qinshi did not expect was that Chang Ling's speed was quite fast. It was like a big net falling from the sky, covering Qinshi's head in an instant. Then, it tightened bit by bit like wrapping a dumpling, wrapping Qinshi firmly. Qinshi brandished his long sword, trying to split the long silk. However, this long silk seemed to be made of water. After the sword pierced into it, it did not encounter any resistance. No matter how Qinshi slashed, the long silk did not show any signs of damage. Qinshi tried to touch the long silk with his hand, wanting to tear it apart. However, he found that the long silk had become extraordinarily sturdy. No matter how hard he tried, it was futile. It could be said to be both soft and hard. In the face of this unbreakable long silk, Qinshi had no way to break it. He could only watch as he was wrapped in the long silk like a mummy. Looking at how the azure billowing silk gauze tied up Qinshi so easily, Shui Xiang could not help but laugh contemptuously. "You only have this little ability?" She thought that this man might have some ability. She did not expect that he was just a guy who was strong in appearance but weak in reality. It may be more than that. Even though he was tied up like a dumpling, Qinshi's face still did not show any expression of panic. Instead, he calmly replied to her. "You don't know life from death." Shui Xiang glanced at him and then waved her arm. An icicle suddenly appeared not far from Qinshi's forehead. Looking at that posture, Shui Xiang probably wanted to use the icicle to cut open his head, however. At this critical juncture, Qinshi did not seem to be anxious at all. Instead, he suddenly smiled and said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. When you are fighting with others, don't let your guard down, especially behind you." Hearing this, Shui Xiang could not help but frown and quickly turned to look behind her. At this time, she found that the divine sword Dharma idol was not far behind her when she did not know when. The divine sword was slightly blooming with a strange light, but Shui Xiang could not detect any signs of spiritual energy fluctuations on this sword at all. Until, when the divine sword Dharma idol suddenly flew toward her, Shui Xiang finally realized that it contained a huge amount of spiritual energy. "You? Shameless." A lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit. Even if the opponent was a woman, even if the method used was despised, Qinshi still chose to take her down in a way that was close to a sneak attack. In fact, when Shui Xiang was fighting with the group of United States guys just now, Qinshi had quietly set up a large aura concealing array and used it to show weakness to the enemy in order to catch them off guard. Shui Xiang was indeed tricked. Perhaps she did not even think that this man, in addition to being far more powerful than her, would actually use a sneak attack method. When the aura concealing array could not hide the spiritual energy fluctuations contained in the divine sword Dharma idol, Shui Xiang finally realized how terrifying this man in front of her was. Setting the universe as the god, the Qinkuan sword finger. Man and earth worship heaven for the heavenly sword. The three famous swords, heavenly sword. The first move was a killing move. Shui Xiang's reaction was also very fast. With a wave of her arm, the long silk immediately flew out from Qinshi's body. The spiritual energy fluctuations on the divine sword Dharma idol gave her a lot of pressure. Shui Xiang did not think that she could steadily take this sword with just the protective aura, so she quickly recalled the long silk. But it was a pity, Qinshi obviously would not give her this opportunity. Therefore, with a thought, the divine sword Dharma idol suddenly cut through the sky like a bolt of lightning and instantly came in front of Shui Xiang. The sword was 3 feet long. A green rainbow pierced the sky. Under Qinshi's killing move that had been accumulating power for a long time, Shui Xiang did not even have time to react. The divine sword Dharma idol directly broke through the protective aura and directly pierced through her slender body. At this time, the long silk that came late finally returned to Shui Xiang's hands. Shui Xiang lowered her head and stared blankly at her abdomen. This sword, it directly pierced through her body and at the same time, shattered her middle dantian. However, after all, she was an existence above the heavens. Although the injury was very serious, as long as it was treated in time, there was still a chance for recovery. But, would Qin Shi give her this chance? Shui Xiang instinctively wanted to escape. But when she felt the surging spiritual energy fluctuations behind her, Shui Xiang made a completely different choice from Changli's. As a result, Shui Xiang suddenly let out a shrill and high-pitched scream. Immediately after, the long silk on her arms suddenly danced and then wrapped around her body again and again. At the same time, the spiritual energy in Shui Xiang's body also began to fluctuate violently. And as the spiritual energy in her body continued to flow out, the surrounding temperature also suddenly dropped. After the long silk had completely wrapped Shui Xiang, her body began to freeze. Just like in the movie, The Day After Tomorrow, the extremely cold aura that flowed out from Shui Xiang's body almost instantly froze the sea. Then, a huge ice block appeared in front of Qin Shi. This woman. Chapter 289. The spirit qi that overflowed from Shui Xiang's body seemed to have a strange magical power. Under the influence of the spirit qi, the blue and magnificent sea began to gradually freeze at a speed visible to the naked eye. Therefore, in a short while, the sea that Qin Shi could see had all turned into polar glaciers. Perhaps it was because the temperature had dropped too much. When the extremely cold aura spread out with Shui Xiang as the center, even the waves of the sea maintained their original shape, as if they had become Tianshan snow lotuses of all shapes and sizes. Facing such a strange scene, even Qin Shi could not help but be amazed. Shui Xiang turned into a lump of ice and floated in the air. After the ocean below was frozen, the ice that sealed Shui Xiang also fell heavily from the sky. Bang! The huge ice hit the ice and immediately splashed a lot of ice chips. At the same time, countless spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the ice. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but frown slightly. Immediately after, he raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the ice in the air. A green sword light burst out and hit the ice block in an instant. But what surprised Qin Shi was that this sword did not leave any trace on the ice. In fact, there wasn't even a single scratch on his skin. How could this be an ice cube? It was like the vibranium shield in the hands of Captain America. It was a super hard metal that only existed in science fiction movies. No wonder Shui Xiang did not choose to escape after being injured, but chose to freeze herself. Come to think of it, this was her last life-saving means. Qin Shi came to the ice, reached out and knocked on the ice, then thoughtfully dispersed the divine sword Dharma in his hand. This ice contained most of the true qi that Shui Xiang had obtained over the years, so it became so hard. Although Qin Shi could break the ice and forcibly dig Shui Xiang out of the ice, it would take a certain amount of time. Therefore, after thinking about it, he decisively threw this idea to the back of his mind. In fact, Qin Shi was not the kind of devil who would kill everyone once he made a move. The reason why he attacked Shui Xiang was mainly because he wanted the three of them to stay on Earth temporarily and use this to buy himself some time. Last time, in order to help Ying find the silver immortal soul, Qin Shi directly killed the clan elder and Changli. However, he did not silence them, so the entire village knew of his existence. Fortunately, Wu Lian had already recruited most of the villagers, so as long as Wu Lian issued a gag order, there shouldn't be any more problems. In addition, based on the previously known clues, it was obvious that the divine gate was not something that could be opened at will. Once he cut off all the clues, even if the gate of heaven opened again, what could he do? Could it be that he really had to find this murderer in this vast sea of people? Was that even possible? Qin Shi calculated carefully. It wasn't because he realized that there might be a holy land of immortal cultivation that was comparable to the heavenly spiral continent behind the heavenly gates that he was afraid of. It was because he didn't want to cause trouble. Just like what he usually said when he taught Yin, we don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble. Right now, he simply wanted to give his wife and children a stable and happy family. This was the only thing he wanted to pursue for the rest of his life. Thinking of this, Qin Shi took out the satellite phone that Wu Lian gave him during the last mission, and then called his sister-in-law. Qin Shui seemed to have reported what happened here to the headquarters. Therefore, When Qin Shueching received Qin Shi's call, she directly asked, "Do you need backup?" "No, it's more or less settled." Qin Shi told his sister-in-law his thoughts as he slowly walked around the ice block. Shui Xiang had already sealed herself in ice. If there was no external help, she probably wouldn't be able to wake up for 3 to 5 years. The three of them worked together. Now that something had happened to Shui Xiang, the other two must have received the news. Since that was the case, then let's wait for the rabbit to appear. After a few simple words with his sister-in-law, Qin Shi hung up the phone. Immediately after, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Qin Shi sat cross-legged next to the ice block and silently cultivated. After a while, a green light swept over from the distant horizon. The man in green was called Qing Wan, so the one in white was obviously Bai Hong. Qing Wan was the first to return to the location of the strong light. Qin Shi noticed his arrival, so he raised his head to look at the situation. But at this moment, Qing Wan's voice was like a thunderclap, resounding through the entire sky. "You're the one who hurt Shui Xiang." His voice was very low, and there was a hint of anger that seemed to be on the verge of being unable to suppress. Qin Shi raised his head slightly. Just as he was about to answer, Qing Wan suddenly stretched out his right hand. Immediately after, a long spear suddenly appeared in his hand. Seeing that Qing Wan was about to start a fight, Qin Shi hurriedly waved his hand and shook his head to explain, "It's not me, it's the group of United States guys who did it." Hearing this, Qing Wan couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't seem to understand Qin Shi's meaning, so a suspicious expression suddenly appeared on his face. Seeing this, Qin Shi immediately struck while the iron was hot and explained, "The group of United States guys threw a nuclear bomb." This girl couldn't withstand it, so she turned herself into ice. "Here, it's this." After that, Qin Shi reached out and pointed at the huge ice block next to him. Qing Wan didn't speak. The expression on his face was a little uncertain, as if he couldn't figure out whether what Qin Shi said was true or false. So, after thinking for a while, Qing Wan flew down from the sky, and then carefully looked at the ice block in front of him. "Nuclear bomb, do you know about it? That's the most powerful weapon in the world. With a boom, it can erupt with a temperature higher than the sun." Then this girl became like this. "Weapon? There is such a magic weapon in the lower realm? Why have I never heard of it?" Qing Wan was completely frightened by Qin Shi, so he held the long spear in his hand and carefully observed the fluctuation of spirit nearby. Seeing this, Qin Shi smiled without saying anything. He was not teasing Qing Wan because he was bored, but because he wanted to use this opportunity to understand whether the connection between the three of them was close, and use this opportunity to find out if there was also a supreme magic weapon in the Heavenly Gate that could go back in time and explore the past like in the Heavenly Jade world. Judging from Qing Wan's reaction, the result was obvious. The connection between them was actually only to the extent of whether the other party was in danger. From this point of view, these ancient cultivators were even worse than soldiers on the modern battlefield. There was no spirit fluctuation on Qin Shi's body, so Qing Wan didn't take him seriously at all. Instead, he looked at all suspicious things around him. However, just as Qin Shi was about to repeat the same trick and take down Qing Wan in one fell swoop, a white sword light with shocking power fell from the sky and slashed directly at the position where Qin Shi was. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't panic at all. He grasped in the air and raised his hand. A green sword light went against the sky and collided fiercely with the white sword light in midair. The surging vital essence suddenly collided in midair, and the invisible shock wave even caused the ice below to separate and collapse on the spot. In an instant, the sword chi on the endless ice surface was crisscrossed, and ice chips shot in all directions, like a sudden polar ice storm. Qin Shi held the divine sword Dharma idol in his hand, looked up at the white figure in the air, and couldn't help but smile slightly. Chapter 290. His white robe fluttered as he floated over. Before the person arrived, the sword had arrived. Just like what Gu Long described in the first sentence of The Sword of the Third Young Master, the sword aura spanned 30,000 miles, and the light of the sword chilled 19 provinces. Bai Hong was indeed as his name suggested. The moment he appeared, he was like a white rainbow, instantly taking away all the colors between heaven and earth, so that the entire world seemed to be left with only that white figure. However, when Bai Hong saw Chen Shi casually receive his sword strike, he didn't attack again. Instead, he suddenly lowered his head, saying to Qing Wan, who still didn't understand the situation, "From when we left until now, it has only been the time of a cup of tea. The divine gate is here." But Shui Xiang did not directly return to the divine gate. Instead, she chose to freeze herself here. "Qing Wan, what do you think? Why did she do that?" Hearing this, Qing Wan could not help but be stunned. After thinking for a while, he frowned and asked, "Why?" "Because she did not even have the chance to escape." Bai Hong slowly floated to Qing Wan's side. The two stood side by side, and then both of them looked at Chen Shi. Looking carefully, one could see that Qing Wan's eyes were full of suspicion and vigilance, while Bai Hong's eyes were full of surprise. "I did not expect that there would be such an expert in the lower realm." "Changli, I'm afraid you have already killed him?" "Changli?" Hearing this, Chen Shi raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Quite a poetic name, but I feel that this name does not seem to match his appearance." This seemingly nonsensical answer was actually an indirect admission of the matter. Changli had already died under his sword. He was the divine general that the elders had invited using the spirit binding formation. It had to be said that Changli was very unlucky. At that time, Chen Shi had not recovered from his injuries and needed to burn his blood essence to fight with him. But the consequence of burning his blood essence was, he did not control his strength, so Changli ended up without a corpse. Chen Shi had already said so much. No matter how slow Qing Wan was, he finally came back to his senses. If Bai Hong had not arrived in time, he was afraid that he would have been fooled by Chen Shi. Therefore, after being stunned for a moment, Qing Wan instantly roared at Chen Shi in anger. Just look at how angry he was. He looked like an enraged beast. He saw, Qing Wan stepped forward fiercely, the long spear in his hand drew a starlight in the air. Then, like a meteor, he shot straight to Chen Shi. After this spear thrust, the long spear burst out a huge burst of qi. Like a high-speed rotating drill, the spiral qi energy blasted towards Chen Shi while also sucking in the nearby air, so that there was a temporary vacuum between the two. It could be said. Of course, the dragon. The divine general, rushed towards Chen Shi with a great momentum. The qi that overflowed in the process of its advance plowed a huge gully in the thick ice surface. The spear was 13 feet long, the spearhead was slender like a reed leaf, the shaft was like wood but not wood. The entire body was indigo and carved with dragon patterns. The name of this spear was Starlight. Bai Hong, who was at the side, did not stay idle as the long spear struck. The moment Qing Wan pounced, Bai Hong wielded his long sword and started to dance in the air. Strangely, every time he swung his sword, the long sword would leave a white mark in the air. In the blink of an eye, the air around Bai Hong was like glass, with countless scratches. Go! After a total of 108 strokes, Bai Hong suddenly turned the tip of his sword and pointed it directly at Chen Shi. Then, these scratches seemed to have received some kind of response and suddenly shot towards Chen Shi. A long spear as fast as a dragon, 100 long swords as swift as rain. Facing the two aggressive attacks, Chen Shi's lips suddenly curled into a smile. Then, under Bai Hong's slightly surprised gaze, the divine sword Dharma in Chen Shi's hands suddenly turned into spots of starlight and drifted away. This is, giving up on resisting? Even with Bai Hong's intelligence, after seeing Chen Shi's strange behavior, he could not react in time. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The long spear came crashing down. But just as the long spear was about to pierce Chen Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from Qing Wan's eyes. Impossible. Qing Wan's eyelids twitched, and he immediately wanted to withdraw his long spear. But this spear was used with all his strength. How could it be so easy to withdraw? Qing Wan was like a bull that lost control, and instantly rushed to the position where Chen Shi was just at. But then, the scene in front of him completely changed. He was clearly still on the ice surface condensed by Shui Xiang, but in the blink of an eye, how did he come to a sea of fire? Qing Wan held the long spear in his hand and looked around. It was all a sea of magma. The high temperature constantly evaporated the moisture in the air. After Qing Wan held the long spear and looked around, he suddenly found that there was not even a bit of spiritual energy in this place. What exactly is this place? Qing Wan was a little surprised, but at this moment, the magma below suddenly boiled. Then, a fire Qilin suddenly jumped out of the magma, then stomped on the ground with its back foot and bent its front foot slightly, and fiercely roared at Qing Wan. Roar! If Nian was here, she would probably tilt her head and murmur in confusion, "Papa, this big cat looks like a big cat." While Qing Wan was in trouble, Bai Hong was also in a bad situation. Because he did not move randomly, Bai Hong did not directly fall into the array set up by Qin Shi in advance like Qing Wan. But it was precisely because he did not fall into the array that Bai Hong now needed to face Qin Shi directly, and when he really faced Qin Shi, Bai Hong finally understood what was called pressure. Just by standing there, this mysterious man made him feel an enormous pressure that was as heavy as a mountain and as deep as an abyss. Could it be, Ming Yao's 4 sons were destined to die under this person's sword today? Bai Hong held the long sword in his hand, his hair and beard were all standing up, and he was ready for battle. But while he was on guard, Qin Shi suddenly laughed. "Wait a minute, there are mosquitoes." After that, Qin Shi pointed his sword to the sky. A green sword light suddenly burst out, instantly rushed into the clouds, and then directly hit the United States reconnaissance plane that had been hovering in the cumulonimbus layer. Boom! Hearing the sudden explosion in the sky, Bai Hong's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation. But after hesitating for a while, he still held the long sword in front of his chest, and then said to Qin Shi seriously, "My name is Bai Hong, and my sword name is Flowing Cloud. Please enlighten me." After his voice fell, Bai Hong's entire aura changed. If Bai Hong was more like a noble son who walked out of a painting just now, then now he was completely an unsheathed sword, exuding a sharp sword intent all over his body. Where the Tao exists, even if there are thousands of people, I will go forward. Chapter 291. I have a sword that can cut through people's hearts and ghosts. I have a heart that laughs on the road to immortality. The so-called swordsman did not cultivate the sword, but the heart. Since he held a 3-foot sword, he should be as upright as a sword, as unbreakable as a sword, as sharp as a sword. Only the sword, only the heart, only the self. Therefore, when Bai Hong held the flowing cloud sword and calmly reported his name to Qin Shi, his entire temperament changed completely, like a sharp sword out of its scabbard, shiny, clear, and sharp. Invisible sword intent gushed out from Bai Hong's body, like a tornado that suddenly rose, expanding outwards with his position as the center. In an instant, small scratches appeared on the surface of the ice, as if someone had used a knife to scrape the surface of the ice. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but smile. From Bai Hong's performance just now, he had indeed touched the true essence of the sword. But unfortunately, Bai Hong had only reached the level of intent, and had not really stepped into the level of heart. If one had to use simple words to summarize, it would be, "Benefactor, you're thinking too much." The sword was just a weapon. As long as there was a sword in the heart, even if there was only a branch or a leaf in the hand, why couldn't it be a sword? When a swordsman no longer stopped at the surface, even if there was nothing in the hand, as long as the palm was straight, the palm could be a sword. The sword was not just a weapon. Of course, this kind of pure concept had nothing to do with cultivation, and could only be used to see if a person had the talent to learn the sword. Confucius said, "Those who are born with knowledge are superior, those who learn to know are inferior." Qin Shi had seen a real genius in the way of the sword. He learned the sword at the age of 5, and had already understood the swordless realm at the age of no doubts. In comparison, Qin Shi, who took 500 years to understand the heart sword, was obviously not a peerless genius. Qin Shi did not seem to take Bai Hong seriously at all. When the term sword cultivator appeared in his mind, his thoughts couldn't help but drift further and further away. He even stood there in a daze. Bai Hong saw that Qin Shi did not respond, so she once again performed a sword salute, and then said with a solemn expression, "Please enlighten me." Towards this mysterious man who had defeated Chang Li and Shui Xiang one after another, Bai Hong clearly had to be 120% alert. The word Mr. clearly expressed his feelings at this moment. In this battle, he couldn't escape, and he couldn't. The only way was to fight. Bai Hong's fighting spirit was overflowing, and the surging sword intent was like a basin of cold water suddenly poured on Chen Shi's head, making Chen Shi suddenly come back to his senses. I'm sorry, I got distracted. I don't dare to teach you anything. You can use your sword. I want to see your moves first. Maybe I can get some inspiration from it. Chen Shi smiled apologetically at Bai Hong. His tone was very casual, as if he was chatting with a friend. Hearing this, Bai Hong's expression was very serious. After bowing to Chen Shi again, Bai Hong pulled out a sword flower and shouted loudly, "If that's the case, then I'll offend you." As the voice fell, Bai Hong's figure suddenly flew into the air. As Bai Hong pointed the long sword in his hand, the long sword suddenly burst out in extremely dazzling light. Immediately after, a huge shadow of a divine sword faintly appeared around Bai Hong, and he himself was in the position of the sword hilt. This move is called hitting water. Please enlighten me, Mr. Transforming feather hanging sky, tugging wind 90,000 shaking scales across the sea, hitting water 3,000. The first move of the Fuyao sword technique, hitting water. The huge sword shadow crashed down with a bang. At this time, Chen Shi held the divine sword Dharma form in his hand and once again slashed out a green sword light. Perhaps it was because it was too hasty, but the cyan sword light seemed too small compared to the sword shadow formed by the white rainbow. As soon as they touched, the green sword light was completely swallowed by the white sword shadow. Without any obstruction, the white sword shadow crashed down. Boom! Like an intercontinental missile hitting its target, the surging true origin immediately caused a violent explosion on the ice surface. One had to know that because of the extreme cold in the water, the layer of ice that condensed on the surface of the sea was at least 10 meters thick. When the sword came down, it actually shattered the endless layer of ice into pieces. How was this still a missile? It was simply a comet hitting the earth. In an instant, the waves rolled and roared. The huge force caused the water below to spurt up to a height of nearly 100 meters. Looking down from the sky, one could see that the position where Chen Shi was just at was the center of the explosion. The 100-meter-tall wave continued to spread out in a circular shape, wave after wave, and did not calm down for a long time. It could be said that it really lived up to the name of this move. Hitting water. Kuan Peng hitting water 3,000 miles. Bai Hong's move caused the surface of the sea to drop by nearly 100 meters. However, the sea had to calm down in the end. When the waves that were smashed by him gradually flowed back, Bai Hong frowned and flew out of the sea. Something was wrong. Just now, he had clearly locked onto that person's chi, and that person had not dodged, so this sword must have hit him. Then, where was he? Bai Hong flew in the air and looked around, but he did not even see a shadow of a person. Could it be that that person was just a facade, and under his full-strength attack, he was turned into powder on the spot, and even his corpse could not be found? How could it be? Bai Hong frowned and looked around, but he did not detect any signs of spirit chi fluctuations. But at this moment, a crisp sound of palms came from not far behind him. Pa, 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 very good, accumulating strength and attacking with full strength. It is indeed worthy of my reference, but there is also a flaw, and that is that this move is actually not suitable as the first move of this sword technique, especially when the opponent's strength is on par with yours, or even slightly stronger than yours. This flaw will become particularly prominent. I don't know if you have heard of this saying. The fist is 30%, the leg is 70%. The fist is 30% of the strength, and the sword is agile, so naturally it is the same, so this move can only be used later, and is not suitable to be used at the beginning of the fight. Also, let me say one more thing, such a wide-open move is obviously more suitable for your spear user friend, am I right? Bai Hong looked back, only to see Chen Shi appear behind him, unscathed. Looking at his relaxed and calm face, Bai Hong felt the pressure in his heart increase, and he almost had a feeling of suffocation. This person, is he a human or a ghost? What realm is he in? Why does he give me a completely unfathomable feeling? How is this possible? Bai Hong's expression was a little uncertain. At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly smiled and said, "Oh right, that friend of yours who turned into ice was accidentally sent flying by you. Do you want me to bring you to look for him?" Hearing Qin Shi's slightly joking words, Bai Hong felt even more pressure in his heart. But at this moment, he seemed to have thought of something, and could not help but mumble softly, "Friend?" Following closely, Bai Hong seemed to have finally understood something, and fiercely withdrew his long sword, then said to Qin Shi with a serious face, "So I have been under your control from the beginning to the end. Sir, you are indeed very capable." Chapter 292. I've learned my lesson. After saying that, Bai Hong acted out of character, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. This kind of calm and relaxed performance was a world of difference from the solemnity he showed before. Then, Bai Hong slowly withdrew his long sword under Qin Shi's gaze, and then sat cross-legged in the air calmly. Looking at that posture, it seemed that he didn't want to fight anymore. Seeing this, the smile on Qin Shi's face couldn't help but shrink a little. After seriously sizing up Bai Hong, Qin Shi could only praise from the bottom of his heart, "You're indeed very smart, at least much smarter than your three companions. Sir, you flatter me." Bai Hong smiled slightly, looking like he had a card up his sleeve. It seemed that he had completely seen through Qin Shi's little trick. In fact, from the time when Shuixiang froze itself to the time when Bai Hong and Qing Wan arrived, Qin Shi was not idle at all. Using the ice that froze Shuixiang as the formation door, and using the gate of heaven that constantly devoured the surrounding spirit energy as the formation core, Qin Shi cleverly used the materials on the spot, so he quickly set up a large-scale formation that seized the fortune of heaven and earth. Mind Confusion Array. Due to the limited conditions, this formation was mainly focused on trapping and disturbing. It did not have any offensive ability, and it could only be effective on enemies whose cultivation level was lower than the one who set up the formation. Looking at the current situation, this formation did indeed allow Qin Shi to achieve his goal. But it was a pity, however, Bai Hong was much more intelligent than he had imagined. Just by the word "friend" that Qin Shi casually mentioned, Bai Hong was actually very sensitive to the fact that he might have fallen into Qin Shi's trap. If he didn't break the formation, then Bai Hong would not be able to hurt Qin Shi at all even if he exhausted all his strength. Because, everything he saw now was an illusion. The reason why Qin Shi had been using words to pressure Bai Hong was purely because he wanted to use them to break down Bai Hong's psychological barrier, so that Bai Hong would fall deeper and deeper, treating the illusion as real and wasting her true essence in the array formation for nothing. Once their Jin Yuan was exhausted, Qin Shi would be able to effortlessly take down the three of them in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, Bai Hong was not a reckless person like Qing Wan. The feeling of being trapped in an illusion array was actually not much different from a dream. No matter how bizarre the dream was, the dreamer would not easily realize that they were just dreaming. Just like how Bai Hong didn't think about why Qing Wan disappeared from her side just now. Therefore, only when the dreamer realized that they were dreaming would they be able to wake up from the dream. Thinking of this, Bai Hong emptied her mind and entered a meditative state. As expected. When he opened his eyes again, the scene in front of him had completely changed. The ice block that froze Shuixiang was floating on the surface of the sea, and Qing Wan seemed to treat the ice block as an enemy, continuously launching wave after wave of fierce attacks at the ice block. Looking at the small cracks that kept appearing on the ice block under the attack of Qing Wan, Bai Hong frowned. If he didn't guess wrongly, his water strike earlier should have hit the ice as well. The man in front of him actually wanted to use the two of them to break the ice barrier of Shuixiang, killing 3 birds with 1 stone? How vicious and meticulous was this? The expression on Bai Hong's face was a little uncertain. Qin Shi's despicable behavior really hurt his nerves. But the strange thing was, Bai Hong did not immediately flare up. After taking a deep breath, Bai Hong held the long sword in his hand tightly and said word by word to the real Qin Shi in front of him, "Since Mr.'s strength is far superior to us, why don't you dare to have a fair fight with us?" Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh a few times. Although his method was indeed a bit disgraceful, it saved him a lot of trouble. Qin Shi's head was not made of iron. Since he could easily outsmart them, why should he force himself to fight with these two people? Do they really think he's made of iron? Moreover, this kind of behavior was actually very common in the Tianxian sector. It was just that, Qin Shi had always prided himself as an outstanding young man in the new century, so when his little trick was exposed by Bai Hong, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. He always felt that he was like Demon King Kuba in Super Mario, and Bai Hong and Qing Luan were Super Mario brothers. The two brothers represented the righteous side and bravely fought against the evil Demon King Kuba in order to save Princess Shuexiang. Ashamed, Bai Hong waited for a while. Seeing that Qin Shi had been silent, he suddenly changed the topic and asked with a bit of probing, I think. Mister, you have to keep us here today? Yes. At this point, Qin Shi didn't hide anymore and simply nodded straightforwardly. Hearing this, Bai Hong asked in confusion, May I ask, mister, what kind of deep grudge do you have with us? Why do you have to kill us all? Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but be stunned. This guy's tone, why does it sound a little strange? Aren't Changli and Shuexiang his companions? Qin Shi first killed Changli, then injured Shuexiang, but judging from Bai Hong's reaction now, these two people didn't seem to have as high a position in his heart as Qin Shi thought. Qin Shi was a little confused, so he didn't immediately reply. Seeing this, Bai Hong continued to say, I think Mr. also knows that it's not easy for us to cultivate to this point, so, if I may be so bold, Mr., let us live. This guy was rather straightforward. Seeing that he couldn't beat Qin Shi and couldn't escape, he actually directly begged for mercy. In the end, it was because there wasn't any irreconcilable hatred between them. From the moment he escaped from the formation, Bai Hong realized that he was no match for this mysterious man in front of him. Knowing that he couldn't win but still fighting with his life, this was definitely not a decision that a smart person would make. After all, death was the end of all troubles. Only by living would there be hope for the future. For an immortal cultivator like Bai Hong, who was more rational than emotional, this was indeed a very simple choice. This time, it was Qin Shi's turn to have a headache. After all, he wasn't some cold-blooded demon king. Since Bai Hong had lowered his head and admitted defeat, then should he kill him or not? Qin Shi seriously considered this question. Perhaps it was because he had been in normal society for a long time. The current Qin Shi was obviously more humane than when he was in heavenly spiral. But there was an old saying, letting the tiger return to the mountain would cause endless trouble in the future. Therefore, after some serious consideration, Qin Shi came up with a compromise. How about this, if you can take one move from me, then I promise to let you live. How about it? As soon as he said this, Bai Hong couldn't help but smile. He hurriedly replied, if that's the case, please enlighten me, mister. It was the same as before. However, Bai Hong clearly didn't understand what Qin Shi meant by one move. Until Chapter 293. The saber was just a very ordinary saber. The only thing that was surprising was that this saber was condensed from the Dharma form. Bai Hong originally thought that this mysterious man was also a sword cultivator, but he didn't expect that he would suddenly conjure a saber. Left hand holding a saber, right hand holding a sword. Because of the difference in level, Bai Hong had always been unable to accurately detect the fluctuation of spirit energy on Qin Shi's body. Until the appearance of this saber, Bai Hong finally noticed that there was a strong fluctuation of spirit energy on Qin Shi's body. Just the movement of spirit chi before charging up for a move gave Bai Hong a very strange feeling all of a sudden. Like a lonely traveler who came to the end of the world, looking at the sea and the starry sky. And Qin Shi was the sea, the starry sky. As vast as the sea, as deep as the starry sky. The moment the long saber appeared in Qin Shi's hand, the calm sea suddenly blew up like a typhoon. The spirit energy between heaven and earth seemed to be guided, and rushed towards Qin Shi's position. In an instant, surging, raging. Seeing this, Bai Hong couldn't help but change color, and hurriedly used the long sword in his hand to draw a sword flower, trying to calm himself down. This mysterious man had already promised him that as long as he could withstand this move, he would let the three of them live. Thinking about it, with the other party's strength, it should be impossible for him to go back on his word. Therefore, Bai Hong immediately braced himself and waited, gathering all the vital essence in his body into his dantian, preparing to use his trump card to receive the other party's earth-shattering move. Although his strength was definitely not as good as the other party, Bai Hong still felt that it was impossible that he couldn't even withstand one move from the other party, right? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but look at the long sword in his hand, and a trace of bitterness appeared on his face. The blade was still shiny and sharp, but Bai Hong didn't notice it. In his heart, he no longer had the indomitable momentum of a sword cultivator. Because he was afraid. Fear before the battle, this was a big taboo. And just as Bai Hong was feeling uneasy, Qin Shi's voice suddenly sounded. Your heart is in a mess, do you want to have some time to adjust? Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. After taking a deep look at Qin Shi, Bai Hong shook her head and said to Qin Shi seriously, no need, thank you for your advice. After saying that, Bai Hong gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, under Qin Shi's slightly surprised gaze, she fiercely slashed her left hand on the sword. Blood immediately dyed the long sword red. However, the white rainbow seemed to be unaware of it. She raised her sword horizontally and recited word by word to Qin Shi, this move is called sun piercing. It is derived from the meaning of the white rainbow piercing the sun. There is only one move, please enlighten me. The comet attacks the moon, and the white rainbow pierces the sun. Anger has yet to be unleashed, but a truce has fallen from the heavens. If the warrior is enraged, 2 corpses will fall. 5 steps of blood, the world is in mourning. An extremely powerful aura suddenly erupted from Bai Hong's body. Even when facing Qin Shi, who was wielding both sword and saber, she was not at a disadvantage at all. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but nod in satisfaction. One must know that when Changli had faced the sword and saber dual mastery, his performance was not even as good as Bai Hong's today. The more intelligent a person was, the more afraid they were of death. However, Bai Hong was able to withstand this kind of pressure. She even managed to break through herself and forcibly bring out her peak state. Just based on this point alone, 10 Changlis could not compare to her. Qin Shi knew that cultivation was not easy, so he had always cherished talents. But regrettably, in order to give Nianyan and Yingying a stable environment, he had no choice but to keep Bai Hong and her party here today. He could not let them return to the divine gate. Come, as long as you can withstand this move of mine, I will let you go. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, Qin Shi finally raised the sword and saber in his hand. This was also the most powerful set of techniques that he had learned in his life, sword and saber. The second move. Sword splitting light, sword vanishing shadow, desolate killing, chaotic mortal world. As soon as the chaotic mortal world was released, Qin Shi suddenly opened his arms and let the sword and saber in his hand fly out, circling in the air. Using qi to control the sword, using spirit to control the sword. The sword and saber flew faster and faster, leaving behind afterimages in the air. It was as if there were countless swords and sabers in the sky. At this time, Bai Hong felt that there seemed to be an incomparably sorrowful and desolate aura between heaven and earth. If he closed his eyes and carefully felt it, it would give him the illusion that he was on a battlefield. A vast battlefield after a great battle. There was no living person, only endless desolation, and the heavy coldness that death brought. This move could actually affect the minds of others. Thinking of this, Bai Hong could not help but shiver. However, he did not retreat at all. Instead, he gripped the sword in his hand tightly and suddenly turned into a ray of white light, charging straight at Qin Shi. There were no fancy moves. 1 man and 1 sword was enough. Even if there were thousands of people, he would still go. This was the white rainbow piercing the sun. The moment Bai Hong rushed out with the sword, Qin Shi seemed to have noticed something, so he fiercely clasped his hands in front of his chest. Then, the thousands of swords dancing in the sky seemed to have received some kind of instruction. They suddenly gathered in front of him and then spiraled into a sphere. The sphere carried a desolate and desperate aura, like the broken swords and sabers on the battlefield. Even if they were broken, they would still shatter everything in the world. The sphere formed by the sword and saber collided head-on with the ray of white light. The moment the two collided, the whole scene seemed to be frozen. Immediately after, an extremely violent explosion occurred. Boom! With the point of collision as the center, invisible energy waves continued to spread outwards wildly. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged, and the sea waves surged. Like an atomic bomb exploding, the huge explosion made the sea water soar into the sky. Looking at the center of the explosion, one could see the colorful seaweed on the seabed. Even the sea was blown up, the power of one blow was so terrifying. Tons of sea water were blown into the air, and then turned into a torrent, pouring down from the sky. The crashing sound of the waves lasted for a full 5 minutes, and the vast Pacific Ocean finally returned to its previous state. Although the sea was calm, Chen Shi's heart did not calm down for a long time. He floated in the sky, and the sword and saber in his hand had already dissipated. Sigh, after letting out a soft sigh, Chen Shi raised his head and looked forward. Bai Hong was not far away. But his white cloak had already become rags, and it was stained with blood. Like a rag doll that had just been fished out of a red vat, blood kept coming out of Bai Hong's body, and then slid down his skin to the soles of his feet and finally dripped into the sea drop by drop. Who would have thought that the bloody man in front of him, who looked like he had been executed by 1,000 cuts, was actually Bai Hong, who was said to be as beautiful as jade, as unparalleled in the world. Sir, good skill, Bai Hong, I've learned. Bai Hong opened his mouth with great difficulty. After saying these words in a voice as soft as a mosquito, he seemed to have lost all strength and fell limply from the sky. Splash! Scarlet blood dyed the sea red. Chen Shi lowered his head and looked at the bubbles mixed with blood coming out of the sea. He could not help but let out a soft sigh again. Chapter 294. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The strong light was still suspended in mid-air, like the sun constantly emitting dazzling rays of light, trying to illuminate everything around it. Chen Shi sat cross-legged in the air, only 2 to 3 meters above the sea surface, looking thoughtfully at the 2 spoils of war in his hands. One was Bai Hong's long sword, the other was naturally Qingluan's long spear. The sword was named Flowing Cloud, and the spear was named Pointing Stars. The quality of the 2 weapons was not bad, even in Chen Shi's eyes. They could barely be regarded as 2 offensive magic weapons. The so-called magic weapons were naturally treasures used by immortal cultivators, and usually had some kind of magical effect. For example, the azure wave silk gauze in Shui Xiang's hands, although it looked like a simple shawl, it had both offensive and defensive functions. When Shui Xiang was sneak attacked by Chen Shi, this long silk immediately turned into a defensive tool, protecting the seriously injured Shui Xiang, which also gave her another means of self-protection. Magic weapons were also divided into grades, according to their quality. They were divided by immortal cultivators into magic weapons, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and the extremely rare innate supreme treasures. Most magic weapons were refined by immortal cultivators themselves, just like forging swords. The craftsmanship of the craftsman and the materials used to forge the sword would affect the quality of the finished product. One had to know that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, it was naturally impossible to produce any high-quality magic weapon materials. Even the cleverest housewife couldn't cook without rice. Without even the materials, Chen Shi couldn't make magic weapons out of thin air, right? Therefore, he could at most refine some simple magic weapons. Just like the pendant that he gave to Aunt Zhang before, it could help her block some dangers, such as car accidents, flower pots falling from the sky, and other unlucky things. But if Aunt Zhang encountered a bomb attack, the power of the explosion exceeded the pendant's tolerance limit, and the pendant would naturally lose its effect. Therefore, these 2 spoils of war were actually very valuable in Chen Shi's eyes. As long as they were broken down and recast, he could use these materials to create a suitable defensive magic weapon for Ninian. Although with Hua Xia's public security, it was impossible for a terrorist incident like a bomb attack to happen. But it was better to be safe than sorry. Ninian was his treasure. If she was accidentally hurt, Chen Shi would never forgive himself. Therefore, Chen Shi weighed the spoils in his hand and kept thinking about what kind of magic weapon he should forge for the little guy. Longevity lock? He was a child after all, so it was naturally best for him to wear a longevity lock. However, children nowadays matured early, especially girls. After a few years, would Nyan find the longevity lock ugly and refuse to wear it anymore? She was a little conflicted. He was afraid that Nyan would not like it and throw it away. Why not make a jade bracelet? Or bracelets, anklets, and other accessories. As a father, he was constantly conflicted about how to please his daughter. But right at that moment, suddenly, an extremely strong fluctuation of spirit chi appeared in the strong light above his head. She sensed something was wrong, so he quickly looked up. After looking at it for a while, he suddenly frowned. Something was wrong. Since this strong light was the so-called heavenly gate, then the current situation was somewhat like, he was watching television at home when a faint noise suddenly came from outside the door. Although the noise was small, it was enough to attract his attention. Therefore, Shi immediately closed his eyes and carefully sensed for a while before finally confirming, there was someone behind the door. That person kept pacing back and forth outside the door, as if he wanted to cross the door very much, but for some reason, he was hesitating. It felt like a thief was checking if there was anyone in the house. Shi did not want to expose himself, so he immediately restrained his aura and silently looked up at the strong light. At the same time, he held Baihong's flowing cloud sword tightly in his hand. The heavenly gate was a magical existence similar to a teleportation array. The inside and outside of the gate were connected to two completely different worlds. Although that person was outside the door, he could still affect the fluctuation of spirit chi inside the gate. What kind of terrifying cultivation was this? Relying on the fluctuation of spirit chi, Shi secretly tried to figure out the other party's cultivation level. And the person outside the door seemed to be worried about something, so after pacing back and forth for a long time, he still did not cross the door. Shi waited patiently. About 5 minutes later, a sudden change occurred. The strong light suddenly burst into a burst of extremely dazzling light. Shi's expression turned cold. He immediately raised the long sword in his hand, ready to make the first move and catch the other party off guard. But at this time, the strong light suddenly flashed a few times, and then disappeared in an instant, as if there was a power outage. Without a light source, the world suddenly darkened. Thick dark clouds covered the moonlight, to the extent that one could not see his fingers in front of him. Even Shi could not see his surroundings clearly. Shi lit up a ball of light. Under his control, the ball of light slowly flew to the place where the strong light was before. But there was nothing left. Even the spirit chi that had been crazily rushing to the place where the strong light was now like a water ball that had been pierced. The spirit chi of heaven and earth that had lost its restraint suddenly dissipated in all directions crazily. In just a few breaths of time, everything had returned to normal. As if nothing had happened. Only the sound of the waves was left between heaven and earth. Whoosh, whoosh, the waves slowly surged into the distance, one after another. Shi let out a long sigh of relief, finally letting go of his worries. With the closing of the divine gate, this matter could be considered to have come to an end for the time being. Now, he only needed to clean up the mess and erase the traces that he had left behind. Then, even if the divine gate appeared again in the future, it would have nothing to do with him. Shi stood up and looked around. After confirming that there were no problems here, he was ready to leave. But at this time, he seemed to have noticed something and hurriedly looked up at the sky in the distance. Because the strong light disappeared, Shi couldn't see very clearly. It wasn't until a black shadow rushed out of the clouds that Shi finally saw the thing clearly with the light emitted by the ball of light. It was actually the trump card of the United States, the B-2 stealth bomber. The B-2 was known as the world's most advanced strategic bomber, with a cost of up to $2.4 billion. According to the United States Department of Defense, every time the B-2 was deployed, it would cost at least $3 million. Therefore, the moment he saw this guy appear, Shi suddenly understood something. This group of United States people, they were really as annoying as flies. Sure enough. When the B-2 flew over Shi's head, it suddenly opened the hatch and threw out two long objects. Shi looked up at the two objects thrown out by the B-2 and suddenly couldn't help but show a dumbfounded expression on his face. Just now, he was bullying Shui Xiang for being uneducated and asked if she could withstand a nuclear bomb. Retribution is here. Chapter 295. The B-2 was known as a stealth fighter, but it actually meant that it could avoid radar detection, not that it was actually invisible. Chen Shi frowned and looked at the things thrown out by the B-2. He didn't need to think about it before he concluded that the two things must be nuclear bombs. It was not that he knew about nuclear bombs, but because as an Earthling, Chen Shi was very clear about the morality of the United States, the world's recognized superpower, the world's overlord, and the Pacific Police. They drove nuclear-powered aircraft carriers all day long and naturally did not put any country or force in their eyes. Tonight's phenomenon appeared in international waters, and international waters had always been regarded as their backyard by the United States, so they wanted to join in the fun. There was nothing wrong with joining in the fun, but the mistake of the United States was, they didn't even understand the situation and they dared to directly fire at Shui Xiang. The consequences of doing so were imaginable. Under Shui Xiang's angry attack, a destroyer was gone, and an elite team equipped with exoskeleton armor was also gone. In terms of monetary value, the value of an exoskeleton armor was comparable to that of a destroyer, let alone a full combat squad. The Americans were infuriated by such a heavy loss, so they sent out another reconnaissance aircraft to investigate the situation. But just as the plane arrived, it was struck down by Chen Shi's sword. The successive attacks finally exhausted the last trace of patience of the United States. Since they couldn't get it, they would destroy it, just like Mahang 370 back then. Simple and violent. The B-2's flying speed was very fast. After dropping the nuclear bomb, it turned around and was ready to leave. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but sneer, then he waved the long sword in his hand toward the sky. Just like a charged weapon in a sci-fi movie, the long metal sword suddenly burst out with a dazzling light. Immediately after, a white light shot out from the tip of the sword. The white light cut through the night sky. An explosion suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the B-2 had turned into a fireball and fell straight from the sky. That scene really had a different kind of beauty. Just as Chen Shi hit the B-2, the two nuclear bombs had already landed not far above Chen Shi. Seeing this, Chen Shi suddenly raised his right hand towards the two nuclear bombs. It was like a traffic police officer making a stop sign. As soon as this gesture was made, the two nuclear bombs seemed to have been hit by a pause button and strangely stopped in mid-air. The two nuclear bombs weren't very big, only about 2 meters long. They seemed to be small nuclear bombs. One had to know that nuclear bombs were limited by their critical mass. It was usually easy to make a large one, but difficult to make a small one. Therefore, in the entire world, only the United States could produce a small nuclear bomb of this size. Chen Shi thought for a moment, then tried to use his spiritual ether to destroy all the internal circuits of a nuclear bomb, completely turning it into scrap metal. As a highly educated person in modern society, Chen Shi was well aware of the value of this thing. Therefore, he was prepared to give this nuclear bomb to the country as a form of repayment to his country. As for the other one, of course, give it back to someone else. After all, it was a traditional virtue of the Chinese people to return the money they found. Thinking of this, Chen Shi used his spiritual ether to bind the two nuclear bombs, then quickly flew in the direction of the Okinawa Islands. The Okinawa Islands were known as the Ryukyu Islands in ancient times. Taiwan's ancient name was Ryukyu. Because of various historical reasons, the Okinawa Islands were now under the jurisdiction of Japan. This location was very special. It was only 600 kilometers away from the bay and 400 kilometers away from the Diaoyu Islands. Since the end of World War II, the United States had established a military base in the Okinawa Islands and regarded it as an important cornerstone of the Pacific Rim strategic plan. In fact, this military base with 50,000 soldiers had always been a sword of Damocles hanging over Huaxia's head. The United States fighter jets took off from the base and could arrive in Huaxia in less than 20 minutes. Therefore, this place was also called by the United States military, the unsinkable aircraft carrier. When Chen Shi flew over the Okinawa military base, the base was as bright as day. Soldiers the size of ants moved back and forth in the base, and many fighter jets were neatly parked on the runway, looking like they were ready to take off at any time. Looking at this situation, the base should be in a state of level 1 combat readiness. Thinking about it, even the nuclear bombs were taken out. Wasn't this a war? Chen Shi originally wanted to throw down the nuclear bombs and leave, but when he saw the densely packed soldiers below, he still hesitated in his heart. Although everyone's skin color was different, they were still fresh lives after all. Maybe it was because he had been with Nian for too long. Chen Shi did indeed respect life more than before. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, he raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the runway below. The white sword light shot out from the long sword and became bigger and bigger in the air. When the sword light hit the airport runway below, it instantly left a huge gully like a moat on the runway. Boom! The huge explosion alarmed the entire base. The rapid ear-piercing alarms suddenly sounded, and the soldiers moved one after another, entering a state of combat as quickly as possible. At this moment, Chen Shi's deep voice suddenly sounded from the sky. Chen Shi's voice accurately reached everyone's ears, as if a god had come down to deliver a decree. I'll give you half an hour to organize a retreat. After half an hour, I'll use a nuclear bomb to destroy this place. I repeat, a nuclear bomb that you won't be able to intercept. So, I sincerely advise you to cherish your lives, stay away from war, and leave. In order to make these soldiers understand, Chen Shi even used English, which she hadn't used in 500 years. It could be said that she was being extremely benevolent. As for whether they would listen or not, this obviously wasn't something Chen Shi needed to worry about. Therefore, after throwing out these harsh words, Chen Shi sat cross-legged in the sky and silently began the countdown. Half an hour, if they really wanted to retreat, with the reserves of this military base, it was actually a very easy thing to do. But to Chen Shi's surprise, the soldiers in the base didn't have the slightest intention of evacuating. Instead, they entered a state of combat. In an instant, dozens of combat aircraft flew out of the base. At the same time, many air defense equipment hidden underground were also activated, ready to launch at any time. Perhaps because the United States was confident in intercepting any nuclear attack, Chen Shi waited for half an hour and didn't see anyone leaving the base, so he could only helplessly sigh. There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it, and there's no door to hell, sigh. Chen Shi didn't want to see the hellish scene, so he wrapped the nuclear bomb with his energy and quietly threw the nuclear bomb at the base. After that, he directly left with the 2 spoils of war and the nuclear bomb. Not long after he left, an earth-shattering explosion rang out as expected. Chapter 296. The aircraft carrier that claimed to be unsinkable, sunk. In fact, Chen Shi had always been curious about a question, and that was, could he resist the attack of a nuclear bomb with his body? Even a small nuclear bomb had a temperature of at least 50 million degrees Celsius at the center of the explosion. This temperature was actually equivalent to the surface temperature of the sun. The only difference between the two was that the sun could continue to heat up, while a nuclear bomb only had a short burst. However, the short moment of the nuclear bomb explosion was enough to melt all the cement and steel within a kilometer into liquid, and even vaporize it into gas invisible to the naked eye. The shock wave generated by the explosion would destroy all the buildings within a 3-kilometer radius. In addition, there was also radioactive pollution that would last for decades once it was leaked. Nuclear bombs were the crystallization of human wisdom. In terms of social status, they were at least comparable to innate treasures. Therefore, Chen Shi was still a little uncertain about whether nuclear bombs could threaten him. After all, he couldn't run to the center of the explosion and use himself as a live experiment in order to verify whether nuclear bombs could hurt him, right? Then wouldn't he be a moron? Chen Shi decisively put this problem behind him, and then returned to Zhonghai with another nuclear bomb. When Chen Shi returned to Zhonghai, he found that Qin Shui had taken people to block the coastline and even the estuary of Dianjiang overnight, prohibiting any people or ships from entering Zhonghai. Chen Shi flew along the coastline. After finding the temporary command post built by Qin Shui on the beach, he threw the nuclear bomb down in front of Qin Shui's stunned expression. when Qin Shui finally reacted and chased out of the command post in a panic, Qin Shi had already disappeared into the horizon. The next morning, when the little guy sat up from the bed with sleepy eyes, Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying were sitting on the sofa outside, watching the morning news with relish. Because of the nuclear explosion accident last night, the media all over the world rushed to report it as if they were on steroids. As a result, this news spread all over the world in an instant, so now at least half of the people on Earth were paying attention to this matter. Finally, 2 hours after the accident, the White House spokesperson finally came forward to explain the cause of the nuclear leakage accident at the Okinawa military base. It was said that a certain staff member had made a mistake and caused an explosion in the laboratory, causing a series of chain reactions. First, it detonated the arsenal, then it set fire to the hangar next to it. In the end, even a nuclear submarine temporarily docked at the port for maintenance was affected, causing the nuclear reactor inside the nuclear submarine to malfunction and explode, leading to such a serious nuclear leak disaster. The Okinawa military base was an important part of the Pacific Rim strategic plan. Even during non-war times, there were at least 20,000 soldiers stationed in the base, but now, less than a tenth of the 20,000 soldiers survived. Even if some were lucky enough to survive, their bodies had been severely contaminated by nuclear radiation. Their future situation was definitely not optimistic. In terms of economics, because it was not a civilian facility, it was estimated that the economic losses caused by this accident were at least $500 billion. This number, it was almost close to the military expenditure of the United States for a whole year. In other words, the seriousness of this accident was no less than the Pearl Harbor incident during World War II. What annoyed the United States the most was, this nuclear bomb originally belonged to them. Throwing a nuclear bomb in the Pacific Ocean was not something that the United States, who had always liked to maintain world peace, would do. Therefore, even if the losses were huge, the United States could only swallow their pride. They had to conceal the truth of the accident and forcibly make up a lie that could not stand up to scrutiny at all. As for what the truth of this matter was, and what kind of undercurrent was surging behind it, it was obviously not something that ordinary people could understand. The little girl sat on the bed and rubbed her eyes with her small hands. Then, like a kitten, she pouted and called out softly, "Mama." It could be seen that after this period of hard work, Qin Ruoying had successfully occupied a position equal to Qin Shi in the little girl's heart. In the little girl's heart, Papa and Mama were finally on the same level. Qin Ruoying was now considered to have succeeded in qi cultivation, and the sensitivity of her 5 senses had been greatly improved. Therefore, after hearing the little girl's cry, she quickly ran into the bedroom and took the little girl to wash up. At this time, Qin Shi went to the kitchen and brought out the 8 treasure porridge that he carefully cooked. A plate of delicious shrimp dumplings and a few side dishes, this was the little girl's favorite breakfast now. The couple served the little princess breakfast and accompanied her to recite a few ancient poems. Then, they discussed today's itinerary. They had already been to their alma mater and met their classmates and friends. So, what should they do next? The couple was now like nouveau riche. They had a lot of money in their pockets. Just the bank interest alone was enough to make them comfortable, so they only needed to eat, drink, and play all day long. They were happy to be social parasites, therefore, where to take Nian to play became a problem that they needed to struggle with every day. The two of them didn't struggle for long. Qin Ruoying's phone suddenly rang. The caller was Lin Xian. After yesterday's catching up, the revolutionary friendship between the two of them could be said to have been re-established. "Ying, I told Lele the news of your return. She was so happy. So, she asked me to ask you out today. She wants to have a good gathering in our dormitory." "Okay, where is it?" "Let me tell you first, I'm going to bring my husband." Speaking of this, Qin Ruoying very playfully winked at Qin Shi. In the past, when their dormitory had dinner together, Qin Shi was not qualified to participate. However, now was different. Her boyfriend had already become her husband. Naturally, Qin Ruoying would bring Qin Shi. After hearing Qin Ruoying's words, Lin Xian on the other end of the phone did not immediately reply. She was silent for a while on the other end of the phone. Then, she coughed lightly and pretended to be calm as she replied, "Okay, don't show off your affection in front of me, you haven't met Lele's fiancé yet, right? Let her introduce him to you tonight. You have sharp eyes, so you have to help her interrogate him. Anyway, they haven't registered their marriage yet. It's not too late for Lele to back out now." Tui, what are you saying? Since they're already engaged, it must be true love, right? What's there to interrogate? I can't say too much about other people's matters. Because they were too close, Qin Ruoying did not shy away from joking over the phone. However, after hearing her words, Lin Xian did not seem to be joking at all. Instead, she said very seriously, "Yingying, I'm serious. My woman's intuition tells me that Lele's fiancé is not simple." "Oh." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying could not help but glance at Chen Shi in confusion. Chen Shi attended Fang Lei's wedding. With his sharp five senses, even without studying psychology, he was very accurate in judging people. Therefore, Qin Ruoying wanted to hear Chen Shi's evaluation of this person. However, at this time, Chen Shi frowned slightly. Speaking of which, what was the name of Fang Lei's fiancé? If he remembered correctly, his name was Wang Shiwu. But why did this person not leave a deep impression on him? After all, Chen Shi now had the ability to remember everything he saw. Therefore, he was very sure that this person had not appeared in front of him more than a few times.